I wanted to use this. Well, thank you all. This is so wonderful to see so many folks in person. My name is Chris Melson. I'm the chair of the OMSC, the Oregon Modeling Statewide Collaborative. This is a general meeting. We have two of these each year. So welcome to this general biannual meeting. I'll honestly negate my duties immediately and I'll turn it over to Matt, who will introduce our special guest.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. Yeah, we're just gonna keep introducing people to introduce people. But I'm just gonna say bathrooms are outside the door to the right, like right behind the screen. And I think that you got some lunch recommendations, but when it's lunchtime, we can do that again. So, but first we have Malou Wilkinson here. She's our deputy director for the planning, development, and research section in our department. So she's here to welcome you all to Metro and say a few words.
All right. Can I stay here? Do I need to get up? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'll stay here then. Well, good morning, everyone. It's this room. I have so many memories of having this many people down the long tables meeting in this room at Metro, and it's been forever. Steve, you probably remember some of those meetings, but it's been a long time since I've seen this room like this. It's exciting. So thank you all for coming to Metro in person. And for those of you who are online, we're happy that you are joining us as well. And I just have a few things to say. As the regional government and the MPO for the Greater Portland region, one of Metro's most important roles is really to bring together our region's cities and counties and transportation agencies to foster collaboration, alignment, and information sharing. And so this is what we do, and this is another way that we are excited to do it with this focus on modeling. We really understand the importance of working together to share knowledge and experiences to help improve our planning processes. And that's exactly what you all have been doing over the years through this Oregon Modeling Statewide Collaborative, which I had to ask what the whole thing meant again this morning, but I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. The acronyms are, it's amazing how many that I think we all have in our heads, but there's always a new one yet to be learned. Modeling really provides a critical foundation to the work that we do here at Metro. It provides us with objective data that underpins the major decisions that are made around efforts like our regional transportation plan, corridor plans that bring in federal resources to invest in transit and transportation in our region, and the land use planning work that we do. We're about to make an urban growth boundary decision this late in a couple months, and all of the modeling that you all do and the way that you share information about the work that you do helps us have better information to inform our decision makers. We've really had a history of doing our best to recognize the importance of good data and modeling to provide that information to our elected officials and regional partners with the information that they need. And our goal is always to build trust in knowing that decisions are political decisions. It helps those political decisions to have that really strong underpinning of good data to inform that. So the work that you all do is really critical for that. Our team here at Metro has always worked to stay really as up to date as they can, to be innovative, and they work hard to be at the forefront of the modeling practices. And we're proud that we've been part of this Oregon Modeling Statewide Collaborative since it started. And we're really appreciative of the work that you all do to share across the state, your knowledge and your experiences that help make our models better. So again, it's exciting to see everybody here today. I won't be able to stay here all day, but I will stay for a little bit. And I hope that you enjoy being here at the Metro Regional Center. And you're in great hands with our modeling team, and particularly Matt here today. With that, am I turning it? I don't know who I'm turning it back to. Okay, back to you, Chris.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's great to hear, and it was great to hear the highlights of, the importance of the OMSC as it pertains to Metro, and of course the work that you do, and of course the work that supports policy. So again, just want to say here formally thank you, Metro, for hosting that. Thank you so much for those introductory remarks. We typically, I think, do have introductions, but again, lots, again, wonderful to see lots of folks in find it the best use of time to do these introductions. So I know we do have a pretty large break for lunch, so I would say you take advantage of that networking opportunity, and I'll probably skip the actual introductions this time around. I was going to say a little bit about the OMSC. I think, just out of curiosity, who has been to an OMSC meeting before? This is sorry for people online, but in the room, raise your hands. Oh, Tara, Josh, hi. I didn't see you all there. Okay, so this is, yeah, very much a seasoned group, I think, for the OMSC. I was just going to say a little bit from my perspective. I'm a little over 2 years in this role, and also my role at ODOT. Previously, I was in Louisiana, but I actually knew of the OMSC when I was in Louisiana. It's really a really core, important group. Make sure technically we're moving things forward in this modeling area as a state. That's really important and frankly very unique to Oregon. I was trying to build something like this in Louisiana. It didn't quite really happen, but just know that this is really quite a critical group in that perspective. Also, just kind of a little bit more information. You know, this isn't like this wasn't established as a formal legislative action, or this isn't like a public hearing sort of group, but very much the technical folks and other folks coming together to move things forward. So just as an FY, folks that might not be familiar with the OMSC, just how important it is. So I'm just going to apologize for that. I'm going to look at my agenda really quick here. As you can see, pretty jam-packed in a good way with very good information sharing, especially in the morning here. So you probably won't hear too much more from me, which is a good thing, I think. My wife thinks that anyway. And so I'll probably be pretty quick with some of the introductions so that we do have that information sharing and time for that and time for questions if possible. So with that, I'm going to look to Carol to see if Joe Gordon is ready to present his presentation.
Joe's on. Joe, you want to share your screen?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear.
All right. Let's see if I can share the right screen. All right, that looks right. Okay. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm here as the equity topic lead to provide sort of an update on what I'm working on and how I think it might intersect with OMSC's sort of more modeling focused view. I think I bring this up at every meeting. I'm kind of coming more from the demography and GIS background and trying to find the intersection always with modeling. So I'm not as much a transportation modeler myself, but trying to find that intersection. And a lot of the data that I'm working with, I think, ends up potentially being useful for the types of work that you all are doing. I do apologize. Around 11, I need to hop off to another presentation. That's how I like to do it, is just have back-to-back presentations in my day. So yeah, let's dive in. Focusing on equity indicators with a little bit of review at the end, just of sort of other efforts that Metro is doing in this realm. So Metro background on equity indicators. How time flies. So about 10 years ago, Metro put out an equity baseline report, which fed into the strategic plan to advance racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And during that process, there was sort of an identification of a bunch of different indicators that would potentially be useful to sort of track over time, if possible. 10 subject areas, approximately 100 indicators identified. Some efforts have been undertaken to kind of put these into map form and allow these to be publicly available. And so DRC, a lot of acronyms in my talk, apologies. Data Resource Center, where I work in the planning department, sort of the GIS shop. Regional Equity Atlas in 2012, Economic Value Atlas in 2018, Regional Barometer in 2019, Social Vulnerability Explorer in 2022, beta version of the Quick Facts Viewer currently, and R-list demography is just an ongoing effort to provide demographic data to ourselves and to the public for use and analysis. Existing R-list demographics, there's a lot in there, a lot of indicators, as you can see, a lot of subject areas kind of being covered here. Plenty of room for more subjects to be covered, which is sort of part of the process of research that I'm highlighting today. Lots of geographies as well, block and block group when available for different indicators, depending on reliability, track level data, sub-county, county. When you get up to the county, you start being able to do more kind of cross tabulations of indicators because you're able to minimize the margins of error. So we can start looking at things like race and ethnicity, cross-tabbed with education, or cross-tabbed with income, or tenure, or home ownership. And for some applications, doing sort of custom dasimetric estimates for the geographies that don't match to census geographies, so UGB, metro jurisdiction, MPA, or metropolitan planning area, council districts. So that's kind of the landscape within which this research is being undertaken. And the current effort is to go back to that equity baseline report from about 10 years ago, review and identify sources for those approximately 100 indicators, and kind of break them into tiers. What's on the shelf, either on our shelf or someone else's shelf, and is pretty much easy to grab and evaluate and put out there. What needs significant or fair amount of research or analysis to evaluate its usefulness or reliability. And then there's plenty of indicators that were identified that just kind of have a question mark. And you know, honestly, it was a little bit of kind of a wish list effort. Like these would be the things that would potentially be of interest to study about our communities, but not exactly sure where to find the data or if the data is available. So that's kind of how we've gone about tiering that. That work is largely done across the indicators. So now we're kind of going out and doing a little bit sort of more in-depth evaluation. Considerations sort of against the R-list backdrop. Again, R-list is the Regional Land Information System. That's the 150 or 200 data layers that Metro puts out for the region. The considerations that are always there, no matter the layer, is reliability, whether that's, you know, methodological or statistical reliability of the data, as well as institutional reliability. How much do we trust that this data is going to continue to be available, and how much can we you know, feel like this is something worth the effort of continuing to publish. And then the other piece of it is just usefulness. You know, how well does the indicator help us understand the communities and the people that we're trying to serve, right? So the subject areas that were identified in that baseline report, a whole bunch of them: cultural, economic, educational, environmental, food, health, housing, meaningful engagement and empowered communities, restorative justice, transportation. And so kind of starting perhaps related to transportation modeling. This is me going out on a little GIS limb here and trying to connect the dots with the modeling world, right? And think a little bit creatively about the demographic data that I'm in touch with. So naturally, I kind of zeroed in on the transportation subject area that was identified. But as you know, as it kind of turned out, this tended to be focused more on small area type indicators, and I wasn't quite sure of, how much this would translate to being useful for the modeling world. Things like public transit reliability and frequency, transit proximity to job, school, household, sidewalk, bike network connectivity, curb cuts, unpaved roads, cost burden of transportation, crash data. And so kind of a question mark for me there of how much of this translates to the OMSC world. But moving into another subject area that seemed like there was a couple that were sort of categorized as economic equity that also had a transportation lens, transportation to jobs and transportation to schools. With the jobs, I've worked quite a bit with the LEHD data, or longitudinal employer household dynamics data published by the census at available at block level, includes information about the origin and destination. So what block does the person live in, and what block do they work in? So that huge matrix of information and sort of understanding the flows. And that can be further segmented by the age of the worker, broad categories of income, broad categories of job type based on NAICS codes. If you look just at worker area data or resident area data, sort of segmented away from the origin destination, you get a lot more granularity, including some other demographic information like race and ethnicity. But the origin destination definitely seems to be a piece that could potentially be of interest to folks, especially at the granularity that it's available at. And then transportation to schools, this is kind of where I was getting a little adventurous with my thinking. We know where the schools are. We have that in our list. We know where the school attendance boundaries are. A little up in the air about who's going to potentially be maintaining that data going forward. It has been the state, but trying to sort of figure that piece out. And we know where the housing units are. So we know in a pretty small area, where people are traveling from to get to school, and could that sort of travel cost consideration be built into some sort of modeling structure? Granted, it's not perfect because people do go to schools outside of their attendance boundaries, but it might be sort of a roughly accurate estimate of how folks are flowing to and from school destinations. And then another piece that kind of jumped out to me, this has been brought up in other efforts, including the Economic Value Atlas and other kind of mappings of the community, is essentially looking at kind of non-residential community assets. And these points of interest sort of were broadly ranging across multiple subject areas, including cultural, economic, food, restorative justice. Perhaps some of this could be derived from business data, perhaps from the IRS, exempt organizations or nonprofit business data, QCEW, ESRI business data, which is backed by Data Axle, and some examples of sort of what those community assets look like: cultural organizations, food access by type, arts-related organizations, churches, social services, other services related to housing, employment, economic development, youth, domestic abuse counseling. And you could see this list kind of growing as you review and sort of evaluate what other pieces of the non-residential social ecosystem are sort of providing a better lens as to what's valuable in a community, and then overlaying that with where we know that people live and who has access to sort of what types or variety of community assets. So that's another kind of, this definitely involves more research to sort of look at what could be possibly pulled out of these various data sets, but that effort is ongoing. Have spent a bit of time already looking at the food access in partnership with the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization on one of their projects, sort of helping consult on that. But more research needed for sure. Perhaps not as related to transportation modeling, but still of interest to myself and and others at Metro and perhaps you all in the room. Health equity. So CDC Places publishes data called the Places data at census tract level, which is essentially kind of a modeled approach, a lot of kind of secret CDC sauce on the back end of that in terms of what data sets they're using, but providing estimates for the number of people in a census tract that have asthma, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, COPD, obesity, blood pressure, and some other things as well. So this would be another lens to sort of add on to our general equity lens and understanding again of the communities that we're serving. Housing equity, a big important issue for Metro as we've kind of extended our efforts into the housing realm. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau puts out data by census tract as well, looking at home loans, interest rates, and associated demographic info. So this again could sort of get at that harder to measure longer term process of building intergenerational wealth via property ownership, right? And understanding, how that distributes throughout the region. And then another data set, HUD-CHAS, Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy, I think. So that's a custom tabulation of ACS provided by the census to HUD specifically to provide more granularity on housing cost burden split out by tenure, renter or owner, housing conditions, demographics. And so that's one that we've worked with a bit in the past on other housing affordability efforts, but haven't really brought it into the RLIS fold officially. So that's kind of a low-hanging fruit to look at. So that's kind of the overall equity indicator research that we've been going through so far. Just wanted to highlight really quickly a couple of other current Metro equity efforts. SVE 2.0, so the Social Vulnerability Explorer and the development of social vulnerability indices for the region. That was kind of 1.0. It was sort of risk agnostic, so who's vulnerable to any bad thing happening, any disaster, any phase of any disaster. 2.0 is bringing in the specific risk so that the user can specify what is the risk that they're most interested in, urban heat, wildfire risk, etc. Cooling corridors study. There's a lot to this. I'm about to present on a whole bunch of it at the next meeting, but just to put it briefly, identifying distribution of and access to natural areas over the long-term, long-range planning to understand how our region is going to continue to adapt to extreme heat. And online language mapping tool. This is kicking off in 2025 and running through 2026. We have previously done factor one analysis, identifying the top LEP languages in our region about every 3 years, and essentially taking that methodology of joining ACS and Oregon Department of Education data to build an online tool that allows jurisdictions to identify the top languages for themselves as well. And I think that is it. Yeah. Happy to take, I got a few minutes, so happy to take any questions or thoughts or did I miss anything?
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Joe. Yeah, we'll respect your time. Having to go to another meeting here in a couple minutes. So I'm thinking maybe see a hand up online. We can probably take one question probably. So there you go. So Cody, did you have a question online?
Hi, yeah, and you can follow up offline, Joe, but I was really curious what your data source was for that school data of the low English proficiency. I'd be really curious to see where you got that from.
Yeah, I'm happy to, I can tell you now, and then I'm happy to follow up online with sort of a more significant explanation of kind of the methodology there. But essentially it's putting in a public records request to the Oregon Department of Education, and you got to, sorry, I realize I'm sharing my screen still. Wonderful desktop view there. it's got to be a pretty specific request. I've figured out how to phrase that over the years to get exactly what I'm looking for. And there is a lot, because it is school specific and language specific, there is a lot of suppressed data in there. And so I have to do some processes to sort of figure out how to incorporate those suppressed values and provide sort of a range of values that those could potentially be, aggregating all the way up to the region. But happy to jump on a call with you.
Yeah, maybe just a quick email, just giving the basics of how you did that. I think it'd be really interesting to a number of folks at the state.
Yeah, sounds good. And and all of that is written up in the methodology, so I can send you an email and point you to that.
Perfect. Thanks, man.
Yeah, Eric, I see you got a hand up. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm having a difficult time working my mute button. Hey, Joe, I love this presentation, and I'm looking forward to you doing a repeat performance, hopefully in a few weeks, for the Environmental Justice Mapping Tool Methodology Work Group. And, and then maybe again beyond that. Yeah, I just wanted to add that, we should just be a couple of months away from, providing some additional health data for you guys down at the tract level. That may differ a little bit from CDC places. We're just kind of finishing up the methodology for dealing with those non-geocodable health outcomes. And once we get beyond that, the data will be available, and I'm happy to share that with you.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Good to hear, Eric. Yeah, let's talk more.
Yeah,
And
appreciate the presentation. That was great.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Appreciate the kind words. I'm happy to reshare it at one of our methodology work groups.
Sounds
yeah,
good.
Peter.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And this isn't really a question for you. It's more of a comment. I think Joe did a great job kind of pointing out all this data that's available to us now. And as you can see, it's in census geographies. And one of the biggest disconnects we've had with our transportation models in the past is that we've had our own spatial geographies, transportation analysis zones that differ greatly in many cases from the census geographies. What we're doing now for our next round of models, our activity-based model development, and even our future updates to our trip-based model, is we're reimagining our TAZs in the region, and starting with the census blocks and block groups. So moving forward, all of our TAZs will now nest cleanly within block groups. They'll be made up of blocks. And so we'll have a much cleaner way of attributing, the typical outputs we get from our transportation models, such as travel times and costs and accessibilities to different modes, with the kind of data that Joe has been collecting. So it's kind of the nexus, right, between taking these two different data sets or tool sets and making them capable of sharing data between them. So I'm really looking forward to working with Joe and others on that.
Yeah, me too, Peter. Previously it's always been a sort of a map back process of trying to asymmetrically allocate back to TAZs some of this data. So it'll be nice for it to be kind of cleaner. Yeah, Zachary, I see you got your hand up.
Actually, just a quick follow-up to that question or the comment from Peter and the work that you're doing, Joe. Is there are any of those reconfigurations of TAZs going to line up even better than they are now with jurisdictional boundaries? I know that would be sort of a helpful thing for some of the work we're doing at the state level for VMT per capita calculations for transportation system plans, or even for maybe not in the metro area necessarily, but for the climate friendly areas.
Well, they'll match up as cleanly as the census geographies do. So, like I said, all the TAZs will nest cleanly within block groups, and they're made up of whole blocks. So, so if the block groups or the tracks can, cleanly match the jurisdictional boundaries, then yes. Although I think there are some locations where it's not a clean match. So if some areas better, some areas worse.
I won't hold my breath for the city of Beaverton.
There's a lot of crazy shapes on Beaverton for sure. Yeah, I think there'll still probably be some deviations.
Okay, thanks so much. I appreciate that.
All right, thank you all for letting me ramble there for a little bit, and wish I could be there, but I got to be here, so I'm gonna hop off and wish you the best for the rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. That was great.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, bye.
Yeah, if folks did have further questions, I think you might contact Joe directly, or you can contact me or Carol too. We'll make sure to get those questions to Joe. I've already done a bad job of being a facilitator. I want just to more properly introduce myself. Again, I'm the chair of the OMSC. I'm also the manager of the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit at ODOT. And I also neglected to introduce the very important vice chair, Peter Buxton. But yeah, we'll move again. We'll continue to move along. Hopefully, folks are at least know about or somewhat familiar with the Oregon Travel Study. We're talking about some of the things, how important the statewide type of efforts are. Very much a statewide effort. Just wanted to quickly give a shout out to the leadership team of the Oregon Travel Study that includes Joe Roach from Metro, Becky Knudsen from ODOT, and Kelly Clark from Central Lane MPO. They've really done a wonderful job to make that successful, and it has been very successful. And Kelly had I guess, especially fun role as being the main contract manager, where all the funds are funneled through Central Lane MPO, so that's even more fun. But yeah, so I'll hand it over to Kelly to provide an update on the travel study. Just as an FYI, it's also a subcommittee of the OMSC. But yeah, I'll hand it over to Kelly to provide an update.
Yeah, thank you. I am here with the leadership team, Joe and Becky, so please hop in if I'm missing anything at any point. So the purpose of this travel survey subcommittee is to develop a planning framework for conducting a household travel behavior survey statewide. We work collaboratively to plan and implement the Oregon Travels Survey, gather information, experiences, lessons learned from national peers. And so we're a couple years into this process and wanted to share out kind of the project status and next steps today. As of July 2024, so this summer, we completed survey collection, and we wanted to share some numbers here about numbers of invites. We've conducted 3 rounds of surveys that all contributed towards the final number of completes. The spring 2023 round was a pilot effort to kind of get some lessons learned, see how the survey mechanism was working, and get some data points about rates of completion. And we translated that into the fall 2023 survey deployment, and then the last one, which again ended in July 2024. So you can see the number of total invites per each of those rounds of surveys, the number of completes, which was over our target number of completes, which was good at 21,673 with a 2.5% rate of completion. The majority of which were completed in the R Moves app, which is an app owned by the consultant RSG. So we're currently cleaning and validating this data. And the next step will be to develop expansion weights, which is a little bit more of an intense process, just the cleaning and validating. And then that will also be QA/QC'd with an independent consultant who is familiar with Oregon, but that we will kind of be hands off in that effort, just so that make sure that for her review to be kind of pure and provide us feedback that ensures quality assurance. Carol, if you could. Okay. One of the bigger next steps that we're working on to kind of carry on this work and be able to do a little bit more than what was in our original contract, we found about $500,000 of project savings through basically mailing savings that were in the original budget. And then we had a contingency budget that we moved into the main survey contract. So the scope of work for that bulk of new funding is now finalized and the contract is, the amendment is in the process of being executed. But it includes, the scope of work includes increased resources for developing weights and documentation for the methodology, increased resources for the final report aimed at non-technical readers. So this is really an education tool, but it's also, we need to do a better job of like ensuring that people understand just how important it is so that we can make sure that the funding is sustainable and that we can continue this efforts in a more like maybe a more regular manner than we do currently at every 10 years, where it's a big effort. It takes a lot of resources and like reinventing the wheel almost every time, especially now that Becky's retiring. We'll be able to carry the torch. So this is an important part for us to be able to kind of promote this big effort and how important it is. We'll also be increased resources to develop a visualization tool, which is part of the original contract, but now it's a kind of a little some more enhancements to that tool. Again, an education tool and a way for us to be public facing with all this data. A new task to implement in-depth interviews for survey participants to learn more about our underrepresented user groups and less common modes. A new task to estimate road users' value of time for use in models and congestion analysis, and other work related to bike route mapping, improving trip synthesis, comparing the survey to the last survey, and developing data sets that feed directly into the ABM model estimation. All of these are kind of, these new tasks are what we brought to the travel survey subcommittee and asked for feedback on how do we want to spend these extra dollars and get their feedback. And now we're incorporating that into these next tasks. Anything you wanted to add to that, Joe or Becky, before I move on?
Note that there were no economic blowouts or viruses that happened during that survey collection.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
the survey.
I know, but there's still data being collected, there's still data being worked with. I don't know. Okay, so then for those new tasks, the timeframes associated through July 2025 will be working at data processing, delivery, and documentation. We hope to have a draft data set ready by early 2025, for some select review internally, and again, that quality QA/QC effort with the independent consultant happening during that time. The in-depth interviews for qualitative insights will be conducting as soon as that contract amendment is completed and we issue the notice to proceed. Those will get started and happen through February 2025. The value of time study estimated time frame will be April of next calendar year through August 2026. And then just a continuing through the end of this contract, the enhanced survey processing. And that contract will last through December 2026. So next steps, again, cleaning and validating data from over 21,000 households. We'll be developing expansion weights. I've already mentioned we're undergoing the extensive review internally and by the independent firm, and we'll have that out beginning of by the end of this 2024, with the data set delivered spring 2025. Working on coordination with the activity sim team to make sure that process data meets modeling needs. And then we have ongoing discussions about how and where to store the data. And Joe has been leading the charge of conversations with the Transportation Secure Data Center as a likely, it's a strong potential to be the holder for that data. They have strong protocols in place to make sure that the data is well secured and also available in the way that we need it to be. And then, yeah, we're starting planning for future surveys. So how do we leverage all of this momentum and all of this like success that we have had as a team, I think, as a travel survey subcommittee and OMSC to create a more sustainable ongoing program. That's all. Anything else?
Neil, what were some of the techniques that you went to fix?
Cards.
Yeah.
Okay.
We did not change the survey from the pilot. We changed the way we entice people to participate. We had focus groups, so we changed the incentive. Sorry, Joe. I was just excited because I started with him, you know, it's like, oh, we did really cool stuff, but yeah,
We tested
Postcard
3 different
timing.
mailers.
Mhm.
One was a letter in an envelope and just different size of postcards, 2 different sets of postcards. And went with the letter because that was getting more response rates. So.
but the follow-up postcard, we thought
With the postcards, that's how you save the 500K through the mailing?
reduced postage because we got people to join and stay.
Huh.
So we didn't have to ask as many people, like a lot of money saved.
Wow.
And we had, because well, Chris, when we were starting this tail end of the pandemic, the just materials costs were all over the place. So we had budgeted in, sort of a worst case. And luckily it wasn't worst case for all that enveloped paper. It's crazy in 2024 that still a big part of the cost of doing a survey like this is paper and mailing, but that's still the only way to reach everyone. Well, most everyone.
Just the 2.5%, how did that remind me? How does that compare to other big surveys of this nature that have been done in other states?
It's hard to directly compare, especially because of the targeted oversampling we were doing. So we were sending more to people we knew would respond at lower rates. But the 2.5% is good. 2% was was kind of our plan for target, and other places have hit that low watermark that I've seen reporting out of the places. So I think
Some went over
we did well.
4.
Yeah.
So it depends on the demographic group and.
So but we were very pleased with that rate. It's part of the reason we ended up, Kelly showed that number around 21,000 completed surveys from that, and 16,000 from the mail out survey was what we had, that was our threshold we wanted to meet for sure. So we came in ahead of that partly for.
And the overall, we wanted 20,000, period.
Yeah.
I
And,
can remember what the initial target was, so yeah.
and then we
Kudos
got
for the city.
21,657, yeah. And then we got 50% of it, of the households did the app, so we got 7 days of travel behavior. Yeah, it was great. We had weekends.
Wow, congrats.
And then, Jim. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question about the value of time study that it goes extended to 2026. I wonder if that study will be corresponding to the ABM estimation process, because usually the studies go before the estimation. The joint estimation, I was talking about the 6 MPOs joint estimation.
Yeah, I think the estimation is probably going to happen in iterations, and so that, I think that might just have to be something that gets tied into a later estimation, later improvement of the ABM. If the data's not there, we won't be able to tie it in. But as soon as it is, I'm sure the OMSC will be looking for ways to tie it into the work.
Well, and there's also no pricing in Oregon currently, so the value of time is more stated preference than revealed. So it's really important for those future projects and not so much for the base year estimation.
Yeah, good point. We'll watch the timing, Jen. Make sure we're timing things right on the estimation.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Well, nice work on getting this over the finish line. This is a huge effort, and these data are so crucial for all the work that we do. So nice.
Penny drop.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting close though, and I'm getting really excited to see some data. It sounds like in the fall we'll get to see some draft data, but the final data won't be out till spring. In terms of data access long term, once we get to spring, what's that going to look like for sort of like different tiers of data that have like more sensitive personal information, something about the route data, and then down to like their actual household level locations? Is there going to be a process where those data can be accessed for certain uses, for certain parties?
I can speak to that some. It's one of the reasons we're exploring the TSDC, the Transportation Secure Data Center, which is run by NREL, the national labs. We're looking to them to potentially allow us to make that data available to a broader group. Of course, for our partners and stakeholders, you'll have full access just as you did in the past, just like last OPAS, with the location data. But TSDC gives us an opportunity to share it more broadly with hopes that other researchers will, find and use it, and we might benefit from that. And they have a two-tiered access system. So the publicly, web accessible data will be scrubbed of any of that household location information, but you can go through a process. I just went through it myself, so I know it's very rigorous to gain access to the location data, but that data you never take out. It stays on their servers. You work within a virtual environment. Anything leaving, gets screened. So we're hoping it might be a way though to be able to share that more broadly. But as far as for most of you, on this call, and who have worked with OS in the past, you'll still have usual full access to do your, run your Josh roll scripts against it. No problem. Thanks for asking. It is something we're exploring. It's kind of new to us. This GPS data set, is mostly new to the survey. We did pilot it with the last OHAS for a limited number of households, but this is much bigger data set than we've had before.
I'm curious why your move participation was so low. With it seems like everybody I know has smartphones.
Well, everyone Bill, but remember it's a representative sample of the state, all ages, all income levels, and rural, urban, both.
They're asked on the side, like what was the participation using the app by MPO? And I thought, well, I don't know why I didn't think of that question, but we could look at the demographics of our users. We knew a little bit about higher income, higher education, but then we didn't really dig in.
And part of it is, you're also signing up. It's heavier burden because the non-smartphone is a 1 day, just the traditional 1 day diary. So a person was making two decisions. Do I want to use my smartphone, and am I willing for all adults in the household to participate 7 days? It's a bigger commitment, right?
We're all adults. So if one of them doesn't want to participate, no one participates.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's a big brother feel. That was one complaint. And then the other one was battery. It just drained your battery. I think that depended on one model. So some people had no problem. But we didn't really explore that.
50% though seems great though.
Yeah, we thought that was high, Bill.
and it is in line or higher according to RSG of their other move. That somewhere 40 to 50% is usually what they see. So we're toward the higher end of the range of that, but we're high tech here in Oregon, right?
Thank you. I apologize. I think I've been ignoring this side of the room, so you can just yell at me if you have a question. But yeah, I think for the sake of time, I think we'll move forward. Thank you, Callie, Joe, and Becky, of course. I guess just to echo what Josh said, others said, that has been very successful. And as you just noted, it's kind of a changing point for data collection, the data development phase. So I'll switch. I think this is, yeah. Next presentation will be by Joe Broach. We're actually just talking about how, multimodal analysis or considerations is really everything. We're talking about travel study and our own modeling thing. So this was, I think, a very great timing for this presentation about Metro's trail gap benefits. I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar, so I'm also here learning with you, Joe. So please take it over.
I see we're right on time. I'm sure that's unrelated to someone else giving the survey update today, not me, but I'll try to keep us there. So I thought for this group, this might be fun. It seems like we're often in the weeds of data and model development, and we don't always get to see that, the fruits of all that in an application of some of the modeling that OMSC and their partners have made possible. And so for two reasons, I thought this might be an interesting study for this group to look at. I think big picture, the reason this was able to happen is because of the model development has been a process and on a roadmap rather than just picking the next shiny model off the screen. So as Malou said earlier, as you develop a model over time and add to its capabilities instead of just swapping in and out, I think you build that level of trust and just knowledge of what the model can do. And so folks like Parks and Nature in the building who are usually not involved with modeling kind of know that, Metro has this cool bicycle modeling that can model new trails being built and the impacts of those. So they came to us a few years ago and we've been working with them since to make use of the model there. I think, and more specifically, we were making a strong case to include something like the Metro bike model in the new ABM and in the joint estimation. And there was strong support for that, it seemed like, from around the state. And so the part of what I'm going to present here is going to going to be accessible to a lot more places, more agencies in Oregon with the development of the new model. We're going to have a bicycle model that functions probably better than our current one, to be honest, but it'll be accessible in some of these other tools too around the state. So that's a big background. If you didn't catch it earlier, I'm Joe Broach. I'm a senior researcher and modeler here at Metro. Also the current chair of the Travel Survey Subcommittee on OMSC and have a research role at Portland State University as well. Hopefully I can advance my own screen. Okay. So a quick bit of background. You don't have to take it all in, but just to situate you of where this came from. And I think it's a good, it's another one of these examples of how coordination through OMSC really can carry these things through time and keep things connected. So a surprising amount of time ago, when I was doing my dissertation work at Portland State University, we worked together with Metro to add route quality sensitivity to the regional travel model around bicycling, so that the model was sensitive not just to how close things were, but to how pleasant it was to bike from place to place, and how steep it was, just how challenging. So we added that capability to the model, and then it evolved over time at Metro, and became easier to run, better performing. This is part of that model development process. You get it right, and then you get it fast, and then you start to develop applications for it. And then, as I said, we fast forward a decade later, the big trail bond passed in Metro, but even with that big trail bond, they still had many more projects to build out in the regional trail plan than they had funding for, and they needed a way to prioritize that. And they went through a very rigorous process with many different layers, but one of them is they wanted to know how useful they would be to people just getting around using the trails. And their consultant ran into a kind of a brick wall in that they didn't have a routable bicycle network, and they were going to need to use most of the budget to build one. And luckily, Trails knew enough to come upstairs back when we actually physically moved around buildings. They came up, and I said, sure, yeah, I can work with them and get them access to. We have a routable bike model as part of our travel model. And as we talked, we realized that they didn't need to reinvent the wheel. Our model had the capability they need to kind of generate the expected increase in bike use from different trail connections around the region. And so that became one of the many factors in their prioritization process of more than 250 regional trail gaps. Council really liked that as well, and so that process continued forward. But in the meantime, we were also working with planning here at Metro in development of another sort of model post-processing tool as part of the Active Transportation Return on Investment Study, or ATROI, around the same time. And that further developed to not just bike use estimates, but turn that into monetized economic benefits. So starting to get more at the real value of the investment in improving the quality. Again, we're still just talking bike facilities. So that was developed kind of in parallel, but it wasn't ready to apply in the initial process. In the meantime, also, in part of my role at the university, I've been involved with an NCHRP project. That's the National Cooperative Highway Research Program that some of our gas tax dollars help fund from the states. Have been developing a guidebook to develop a wider range of benefits for both walking and biking that agencies can apply. And so putting all of these pieces together, all this development, when Trails came back and said, Council would really like to see us focus in on a smaller set, a more refined set of projects that are kind of shovel ready, that need some funding, that fill gaps in the regional trail system. And we wanted to equip the local agencies that kind of advocated for these projects with some defensible benefit estimates that they could then use to go out and try to find to fill in those funding gaps for their gaps. That's the world of planning, right? And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. After all of that, is these high priority trail gaps and applying the benefits estimation techniques from the bike model, the ATROI tool, and also from some of this emerging NCHRP research. Because that's in press, I can't really go into detail on the NCHRP product, unfortunately. We submitted it all in June, but it's still not out. And so I I can't talk directly to that, but you'll see it kind of throughout here. So for those of you less familiar with Metro's modeling world, we still maintain this trip-based model, although obviously we're participating in, closely in the ABM development. And within that model, I've highlighted a couple of components, but we have models that feed into the main model, like our freight model, our land use model, regional forecast. We also have tools that take the outputs of the model, like the multi-criterion evaluation, the MCE tool, which I know some of you are familiar with. The ATROI tool is one I put in dots because it's more preliminary. But here I'm focusing particularly on two pieces that were critical to be able to do this work developed over time. One is our all modes network. So we maintain our modeling network as an all modes network, which includes all streets and trails and is routable. And so we can add in, we can fill in these trail gaps, and we already have the network to the edges of those gaps. That's where the consultant was running into trouble, was they didn't have the base network to fill in a gap from. And then we have this bike tool that was developed along with PSU, and it was developed from a set of revealed route choices of cyclists that rode around with GPS units, and we saw where they went and we saw where they didn't go, and developed models to understand the trade-offs they were willing to make. Those get assigned as well in a separate step from the main model, but that's not the focus here. So currently, the way our bike model integrates in the trip-based model is in both the destination and mode choice steps. So a kind of route experience factor gets developed from some routing tools we have, and it includes things like directness, the type of facility. Is it a bike lane? Is it off street? Is it a bike boulevard style facility? The terrain, the types of intersections you have to traverse, and then of course the motor vehicle traffic and speed, which is a big part of the perceived quality to cyclists. And that feeds into both destination and mode choice. So in other words, when you make an improvement like filling a trail gap, which creates a more pleasant route, that can lead to small but shifts in the OD flows, right? So two places are better connected after the trail gap is filled, and so you would expect some more trips to go between those zones. And then in the mode choice step, most importantly, right, it makes bicycling generally more attractive relative to the other modes when you have a better facility. So not rocket science, but actually in modeling, in regional modeling world, it is sort of still rocket science. There are not a lot of these functional models that are kind of sensitive to changes in the network. So back to our trail gap projects. It was arranged. So these are the ones that kind of made the final cut list, and they tried to spread it around the region. So you see they're all over our region. They're very different links. They have different intentions, and we wanted to apply these tools in a way that gave sort of standardized, methodologically sound estimates of the benefits they would provide, and I should say provide for transportation purposes. So we weren't getting into more esoteric value of say natural area access here. So I'll take you through an example, make it a little more concrete. This is out near Beaverton, where there is a funded trail, the West Side Trail to the north and south, but there's a significant gap crossing Highway 26. And so right now, I think you can see well enough just from the aerial photo that there are not a lot of great crossing options across. These are pretty major highway interchanges or local arterial bridges across. And there's not, from the model's point of view, a sort of clean, comfortable way to connect those two pieces of trail or the two sides of Highway 26. So I'll take you through this example, kind of follow it through just so you understand what goes on. So what happens is that we run our model on a network with and without the gap closed, right? So we insert a new trail there, and then we rerun the best routes between all of our zone pairs. Right now we have around 2,100 TAZs. So you're talking about 4 million connections, and for each of those, there's a single best, least costly bike route between them. And that is what feeds into then the rest of the modeling structure. And so here's kind of the results of running that, and where you see red is where routes have shifted to that facility. Where you see blue, it's where routes shifted away with the gap closed. And so, no surprise, the bike model is finding that new connection between the trail segments, which cyclists prefer, and it's shifting traffics there. And you can't really see the numbers, but if you did, those are in thousands of zone pairs that particular gap connects. And so it's around 150,000 of the 4 million or so zone pairs are best connected via that new gap closure. So this is, a significant improvement in the network. Now, you can't stop there, obviously, because a lot of these trips are kind of irrelevant. If it might be connecting well to zones that are 20 miles apart, right? But still, bike is not going to be at all competitive in those cases, which is why we feed those updated routes and their utilities or the cost of them to people back into the main model system to see, how much value it actually adds to those who are traveling. Let me pause because that's a lot. I know it's a lot of technical detail. I just promised you a nice, friendly application, right? Any questions before I continue to the benefits? Yeah, Alex.
I was just trying to understand. So when you say closed, I don't know that area along 26. So you can't possibly bike across it, and
not at that location, right? So that is, you guess you can't see it right now. There's nothing there. It's just empty sky. So you can't cross the controlled access.
Right, a bridge or something.
That's right. It is. Okay. Yeah, this one is a bridge project. Project.
Are there other cases where you could make it, but it's just like a really crappy no bike lanes kind of situation?
Yes, and everything to the model. There's always a way around, right? So the model is going to route people basically where we're seeing those blue lines, right? So you're going to have to take a significant diversion on unpleasant streets. Yes, though there are other gaps which are, for instance, right now maybe you're on an on-street bike lane, and with the gap closed, you can stay on a trail through that stretch. But they're essentially parallel, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the case of where you can, there's no technical gap because you can ride it.
Yes.
But it's just horrible. And so you're not getting any distance gain, but you're getting quality gain. You still fully close it in that case for that kind of gap? Or is that what you would do because you said close or the gap is closed? I don't know. I was trying to
understand. That's what you're saying. Yeah. And so in the NCHRP project, it was a surprising struggle to define a gap typology because some gaps are really obvious that where a lot of you will walk over the new Blumenauer Bridge over I-84 for lunch, right? And that's like there was no way to cross before, and now there is. That's what we think of as gap, but it can also be a quality gap. So of increasing severity, right? So before Blumenauer Bridge, my route to Metro on my bike, I had to do a little speed race across Grand at the last little jump. That was my only way, and it's high stress but very short. But with the new bridge in the model, and I ran it, of course, my route quality noticeably improved because there wasn't that last leg where you either had to divert all the way up to 12th, mini blocks, or choose the high stress option. Yeah, so it picks up either way. Of course, it's going to be a bigger gain when you're cutting off both distance and you're improving quality. It's going to be a more marginal gain if all you're doing is improving quality or only making a more direct connection. But the party trick of the Metro bike model is that it can pick up both, it weights both distance and quality or, perception of safety, if you want to think of it that way. If that makes sense. All right.
Question?
Yep. Yeah.
Just wondering if you could clarify, Joe, because I feel like a lot of what the model was doing a little bit was moving people around, right? So they're still going from O to D, but now they have a much better route, so that's good. But it wasn't sensitive to maybe new users coming to the system, and that's kind of hearsay, so I don't know if that's actually true. But I'm wondering then, tying it back to our last conversation about the household survey and that last bullet in the contingency, which was trying to get a little bit more understanding of the users, maybe the demand side. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's headed towards that level of traffic stress, where you just don't get users until you get to a level 1 or 2 comfort. Anyway, if you could talk to that space a little bit and connect it back to
there will be both. I mean, typically it's 80 or 90% is route shift. So existing users, you know, shifting to a better route, but there will be new users pulled in, and it really, it depends on the competitiveness with other modes in the end, right? So it depends on how big that quality shift is, and also what your other options are, you know, where you are. If there's transit service competing with bike, if it's a short enough trip to walk, then that's, you know, it's going to have less of an overall impact. But there won't be new trips generated because trip generation is set, right? But there could be trips that shift destination. There could be trips that shift mode. But most of the change, most of the sensitivity is to shifts in route to existing trips. But it is captured new users. In fact, we relied on that. I'll show in the final. Now, just quickly to tell you, we do not have this level of sensitivity and detail with our walk model at the moment. And, you know, this is part of a future long-term roadmap is to improve that. But for this study, we used some of the evolving NCHRP guidance as well as some of the consultants on tools on this. We did use some model inputs here. So they did a kind of a context transfer. So we have trail counts around the region. They found the most similar locations to where the gap was being filled. And that set a baseline, but then it was scaled by our modeled kind of TAZ level walking demand from the model to kind of ground truth it a little bit. But yes, walk much less sophisticated, as you'll see in the outputs as well. It's mostly, you know, in our model, it's mostly just a function of distance and a little bit of the land use typology. And then we get to turning this. So you saw how the model shifted routes, and then as Tara's question brought up, then we get some mode and route shift to people see the system differently in a little more positive way. And so we can get benefits out of this. And so on the bike side up top, that modeled accessibility increase from the better route can get directly converted into it's kind of like a generalized travel cost benefit. It's the equivalent of travel time savings that you do in an auto model, but for cyclists, of course, it's both time and the quality of kind of the experience more so than when you're in a car. So that through the ATROI or the NCHRP tool, honestly, get directly monetized into what the USDOT has us call enhanced amenity benefits. I think it's a really, it's kind of a lousy description, but no one's figured out the term for these benefits that are beyond just travel time, but the experience. Sometimes you see it as travel options benefit. I think that's what MCE tool calls it, right? Yeah. Or you'll see transportation alternatives. It's a measure of how much better your bundle of options have got because of a change. For walk, it kind of goes straight through. So the walk trips get estimated. There's no accessibility increase, but through USDOT and this NCHRP guidance, you can take those estimated new walk trips and get a rough estimate of the value to those people walking from the facility improvement. Down lower, we also calculated health due to increased physical activity and emissions reduction benefits from reductions in VMT. For bike, that was based on the modeled vehicle to bike shift that Tara was bringing up. We also get an output directly of VMT reduction, but to be consistent here, we didn't use that. We went through the trip shift itself. And that gets monetized into health benefits. And then emissions reductions for a number of pollutants. Offhand, I think it was PM 2.5, carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, and maybe NOx. I think those are the three, but it's part of the federal guidance on the key pollutants that have good estimated values. I will tell you that in this exercise, and this matches other research we've reviewed from around the world, the kind of benefits to travelers, that top category, enhanced amenities or whatever you want to call it, accessibility improvements, and the health benefits tend to be the bulk of it, and they tend to be pretty similar magnitude actually in most cases from active transportation improvements. The emissions reductions are going to be lower, particularly in the US when you're not pulling that many trips off the road, since driving is still so dominant for trips above a certain distance. but still we can calculate it. It's meaningful, but not as large as the benefits to travelers and to everyone from health benefits. So just really quickly where this went. So each of these 20 projects got a nice glossy fact sheet developed that included these benefit estimates. Much more technical estimates than you would usually see something like this, but I think it's really cool, and they're going to be tracking, how these get used and whether they're helping them be more successful in grant procedures. But you can kind of see both some basic outputs like the number of expected users, but then also those monetized benefits. We ended up just doing an annualized kind of base year estimate. And I know for those of you who are more versed in economic cost benefit analysis, you might expect to see the stream of benefits over a number of years. We could have gone there, but for a glossy fact sheet, I don't think we want to get into discount rates and choosing horizon years and all that. So we just did it 1 year, kind of people can wrap their head around it a little bit and then stretch it out into time the way that they see fit for a project. I know we're a little short time, but I'll see if this will pull up. It's even made it onto the website, I learned. If we go to the Regional Trail Systems Investment Strategy, now each of those projects has its fact sheet. Go to any one of them and we'll find a similar sheet that I just showed you with those benefit estimates. Hopefully we will. Did I work it out? Yeah. All right, so we've got the project and there are those somewhere. Yeah, there are some benefits for a different project, health emissions and the enhanced amenities. So pretty fun work to do, a little different, than our usual sort of MPO function level modeling exercises, but I think it stretches our models to an extent, and I think that's kind of good for us to see the strengths and weaknesses for different things. That one significant limitation is even though we've sped things up a lot, it's still not practical to run the model. Ideally, we'd run it 20 separate times, right? We'd flip each project on and off so that it didn't benefit from the other gaps. Because it's network based, it'll find all of those gaps and stitch them together. So we just had to do kind of a post hoc adjustment where we just divided the bike where it made use of multiple gaps, just kind of naively. If it made use of 3 gaps, we sliced the benefits into thirds, so we didn't double count. But we could do more in the future with that and with improving performance of our modeling system. It's obviously only a subset of the benefits and active trips there. We didn't do safety, for instance. We didn't have the resources to do that, or frankly, all the tools. And our walk model still sort of limited. So this guidebook will be out before long, and this guidebook has guidance and methods suited, I think, for any agency. So you don't need a bike model like this to do the basics. They're low, moderate, and kind of high capacity methods that involve in that. So I'll plug that a little bit. And then our new travel survey data, the new activity sim development, I think is really going to help kind of make us able to do an even richer version of this in future. Next time, hopefully, Parks and Nature comes asking for some trail work. And with that, I'll wrap up. And I think I might have gone slightly over my slot, but if you have any quick questions, or you can always find me later. Thanks a lot for the attention.
Joe, I think actually just for the sake of time, I know you had a couple of questions to take the questions offline. Again, you can definitely contact Joe directly. Yeah, great, interesting work. And I think a lot of folks would be interested in that NCHRP report whenever it is finalized and ready to go.
I'm sure I'll report back to this group when it is.
Just a quick question, don't take you too much time. It's an interesting project. One of the things about the unmeasurable safety that you haven't covered that, because bike pedestrian, especially linking, some of the linkage could be very helpful.
Yeah, and safety is definitely one we would be, that would be the next thing we added. NCHRP it will have guidance for doing safety. Current safety tools basically just base it on if there's more bicycling, then you'll just multiply by the existing crash rate. It just gets worse essentially. It doesn't take into account you might be shifting them to safer facilities.
Yeah, it's hard to measure that anyway. Yeah. We had a project, Letterkenny I-5. I'm done go, which actually get built linking north and south of I-5 in Olympia by using modeling part of that. But safety was the main concern that time.
Thanks, Jen.
Very good. Thank you again. Oh, Peter.
No, that was an accent.
So yeah, we'll get to the last presentation here. Actually, Joe, you even mentioned the Metro's MCE tool, and this is really, I know there was a lot of work done with that tool, of course, but also recently following up on that work and having that inform the APM design and some other things. So I won't take your thunder, Alex and Kyle, so I'll probably turn it over to you for an update on that, but I think you had also a specific purpose to get some other input. So I'll just hand it directly to you.
That's good. Yeah, Alex Bednardi, ODOT.
Kyle Helger, Metro.
And so, yeah, like you were alluding to, the end pitch is that we're going to be firing up kind of an OMSC work group and wondering who wants to help us work through some of the details in the spreadsheet for how to get additional capabilities into the ABM tool, the activity sim. So that's the ask. But just, I was going to jump right into the spreadsheet because, selfishly, I'm aware of everything that happened and I didn't need to cover any of that. But I'm going to back up just a little bit and give some of the background to get everyone up to speed with the spreadsheet. I'm glad Chris walked back into the room. It's all started back with Chris in 2020, 2021. COVID brought us closer together. And, Chris, I give Chris the credit for launching us into rejoining up for joint estimation, back from the trip-based model, but now to the ABM. So we rejoined in to a joint estimation under the activity-based model framework. And then I think it was in late 2022, Peter Hurley said, if you're going to do this, brand new ABM, you've got to have this metrics discussion up front. You've got to figure out what metrics you need and make sure the design aligns up with those metrics. So in early 2023, we started building on the success that Metro already had around MCE and linking that with their trip-based model. We started another metrics conversation with 25, 30 or so people around the state it was underneath Oregon's transportation plan, which has 6 goal areas. So let's see the test if I can remember all 6. So we got mobility, we got safety, we got social equity, economic community vitality, sustainable climate. What's the climate sustainable one? Sustainable and climate sustainability.
Environment,
like that. And then stewardship. So underneath each of these areas, we had really detailed discussion about what metrics would those goal areas need to what kind of information would each of those areas need. And so that was through kind of spring, summer 2023. In the end, there was a whole bunch that we learned, but some of the key takeaways I'd highlight are that the ABM is really one of the large advancements that we need for the metrics, in that it represents individuals who travel with all of their social demographic information, as well as doing a better job across modes and tracking how all the modes are used. And so you have just fundamentally a different level of information with the ABM than you would with the trip-based model as a starting point. And then some of the other key takeaways were that we're not going to be able to append all of the critical information to the ABM to get all the metrics we need. So the important thing is that the ABM can transfer information about forecasted travel to other data sets, like was shared earlier with all those hundreds of different dimensions around equity at the census geography level. So Peter called out trying to keep our zones at that common geography so we can transfer information that's happening in our travel models easily to those data sets. In a similar way with the ABM, we're working on getting our linear referencing system and mile points and our XD segments captured so that we can transfer information back and forth from those data sets, like what sound barriers do we have and how much lighting is out there are not attributes we're going to keep in the travel demand model. But if we have a simple way to link back to those data sets, we can bring those kinds of information back and forth. So that was some of the key takeaways. The other big one, tying back to Joe's presentation, is if we really want to hit safety, it's not just where cars are. We have to know where all travelers are, and specifically where those conflicts are, where active modes and auto and trucks. So knowing where trucks are, knowing where cars are, knowing where bikes are, knowing where walkers are in transit. So that means really upping our game on the assignment side and making sure that we know what routes people are traveling on, so we can understand those conflicts. So that's the biggest thing to push on the metric side. I'd say, like, moving to ABM, linking other data sets, making sure we know where our travelers are. So that was kind of what we took away from, and there was other things too. Those are my big highlights, right? So that was what we took away for 2023. Thanks to Peter Hurley, Chris Johnson. I appreciate setting us on the right path there. I think we're doing a pretty good job. The design document for the ABM is now finished. I think we did a pretty good job with the design document, capturing those elements, and we're on a good path. Towards springish of 2024, summer of 2024, for a variety of reasons, we wanted to refire that conversation up, and that's where the spreadsheet comes in. So, this is focused on metrics, but we also wanted to tie in the policy side. So you got metrics on the outputs, you got policies on the inputs. And so we also wanted to make sure that the ABM was going to be strong and robust to take on whatever policy questions were going to come out of these different goal areas. Like, what policy should we apply for climate? What policy should we apply for mobility, safety? We wanted to make sure we fully thought those through. So we had, again, a multi-month, 30 or so person conversation across 5 different groups. And we came up with about 55 different policies that are in this spreadsheet, and that was sent out. And I'm not going to walk through all 55 of those, but if anyone wants to walk through 55, that's where we're interested in your names. Contact Kyle and myself, and we're going to form a work group here. We tiered these into 3 categories, these 55 policies. So category 1, tier 1, is we think it's already captured in the ABM. We think it's something the ABM could do and tackle. So interesting, great to know. Check, we've succeeded on that one already. Tier 2 is where the most exciting piece is going to be. Tier 2 is policies that we believe could potentially be taken on with the ABM if we did some additional development work. And so that's where we want to form this group, start digging into these, seeing if there's anything we can tweak in the design before we actually get into the estimation, that we could where we might be able to get more of these policies into the ABM's capabilities. And then tier 3, which you can if you want, but you don't have to scroll down to it. Tier 3 is things that are probably nowhere, like the ABM is just not the right tool. But luckily for us, like Joe's slide showed, with all those different tools that Metro has, the ABM is not the only tool in the toolbox. And so we think that the policies can be covered, just not by the ABM. So, trying to bulk up the ABM to take on as much as possible, but knowing it's not going to take on everything. One fun example that came up, I think that's, kind of easily shows where this conversation has value is in the equity discussion. It was highlighted, I guess, by Joe number 1. We got Joe number 2 and the first Joe up. He called out the food component of it. And so accessibility, I think we already do a good job. Accessibility to jobs, accessibility to health. We have those kinds of things broken out, but food is not a current category that we have broken out in our inputs, grocery stores and, places where, like food, kind of understanding food deserts. And so with what I think is relatively a low hanging fruit, we could, before we get into estimation, we could discuss as the OMSC breaking out grocery stores as an additional category, and then have improved accessibility to how people are able to access a key component of life, getting food. So that's kind of one of those that would fall on tier 2. So that's my speed talk, my speed pitch. I don't know, Kyle, before I turn it over to questions, anything else?
I'm glad you brought up the equity conversations, because I thought those were some of the more interesting ones that we had. Other than that, I think, we can open it up to questions. I think you kind of covered it all.
Time for a question, just a quick question. So you're asking folks if they're interested in kind of reviewing this and seeing those policy levers and if they make sense. What's kind of the next step related to this? This is going to feed into the ABM estimation type of work, or?
I'm hoping in November-ish, we'll start kicking off maybe every month or so meeting for 6 or so months. So maybe 6 meetings, and we'll just try and go through tier 2. Like I said, there's about 20 in tier 2, and my hope is maybe 5-ish to 10-ish. Maybe we think if we do some tweaks to the design, we could get those worked in, and then we would, hopefully by in 6 months, we're live firing on estimation work. And so the window will start to close. There's always the window. I think we can always squeeze things in, like was called out with value of time work, we'll squeeze that into later work. So, but this is kind of a hard push right now to see, is there anything we can tweak in the design to get more of these policies in? That's my hope.
Sounds good. Probably do have a time for 1 or 2 questions. And frankly, any other questions too, probably for the morning. People probably want to have lunch as well. So pause for 1 second. Okay. Well, again, as always, if you have questions or if you are interested, you can contact Alex or Kyle. And with that, I think I'll adjourn the morning session. I'll be honest, I might refer to Carol or Matt. Again, the lunch is on your own. We will start promptly back at 1:30. We'll start the afternoon session. Well, here, again, welcome back, everyone. I think we'll probably have some folks trickling in probably later on here, which is no issue. And again, thanks Metro for hosting us again. Cindy was kind of showing us a few things in this building, and really quite a beautiful building as well. Again, we do have a pretty jam-packed afternoon session. So again, you won't hear too much from me. We'll have 3 presentations. I'm actually very excited for the first presentation, which will be by Rachel Smith. And we kind of talked a little bit about the OMSC at the top of the morning session. And what's interesting about the Oregon Geographic Information Council, unlike the OMSC, it was established by the Oregon legislature in 2017. And there's some similarities where the purpose of the OGIC, again, Rachel will definitely say this better than I do, but just to give a little bit of context to her presentation, it does keep multiple agencies coordinated, related, of course, to managing spatial data. And so again, with the OMSC, it's obviously related to modeling related tools, but there could be some overlap on the purpose and maybe even some opportunities to collaborate. So this will be an overview of that group. I'll just hand it over to Rachel. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, feel free to present.
Right. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep. Thank
You're a little
you.
quiet, Rachel. I heard mostly yeses. All right. You kind of never know with Teams. Most of the time it works and half the time it doesn't. Can I share my screen?
Yes.
Great. So hopefully, I think you should be seeing my slides.
Yes.
Good. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to get going. It's good to be with you guys this afternoon. And yeah, I think I've left plenty of time at the end for some questions and conversation. And I can't see you because I just see my presentation. So if you want to stop me, just holler and I'll be happy to stop. But I was asked to give you an overview of the Oregon Geographic Information Council, and we call it OGIC for short. So with that, I think probably the best way to get started is just to provide kind of a quick overview of the key components of OGIC, my office, and the framework program so that we're all on the same page when I use these acronyms like GEO or talk about the framework program. We all know what I'm talking about as I go forward. So just the easiest ways to break it down with an org chart. So OGIC, you can see, is placed within a dotted line to the governor because there are approximately 20 governor appointed positions on OGIC. OGIC is also supported by Enterprise Information Services, and we're all we are supported and held within the state chief information officer's office. But OGIC, in a nutshell, has been established in statute And it is, as this slide says, the lead entity responsible for overseeing essentially the strategic development and governance of geospatial framework data. And so I'm going to talk about what it means to be a geospatial framework data set and talk about our framework program, because our statute defined that. And so it's important to kind of know what these terms mean. GEO is the Geospatial Enterprise Operations. That's essentially my office. That is the geospatial arm of the Office of Data Governance and Transparency. So I oversee GEO, and we really support the framework program and enterprise GIS at the state of Oregon. So we administer the Esri EA, for example, for all of the executive branch agencies, do lots of data publishing, imagery services, stuff like that for the state of Oregon. And then the GIO is the Geographic Information Officer, and that is my position. And I am also a position that's in statute. And I am also an OGIC member and council administrator, and by statute, I'm charged with doing lots of coordination with all the different levels of government that are working with GIS and geospatial framework data within the state. So the Oregon's framework program has actually been around for quite a while. It's been around since 2000. And it really is our governance program for geospatial data sets. So it consists of the technology, policies, our processes, creating data standards, and the people that are necessary to promote geospatial data management and sharing throughout Oregon. In 2017, the Oregon legislature formally recognized the growing need to improve geospatial data sharing and governance. And so it did pass laws that strengthen the way that Oregon government organizations manage and share geospatial data. And it is this law that tasked OGIC with overseeing the framework program and including the development, implementation, and review of policies and practices and standards. The framework program organizes data into themes, and these themes essentially define a collection of multiple data sets that are organized on a common topic. So, for example, the transportation theme includes individual data sets like road center lines, railroads, bridges, culverts, etc. And we began our program using the nationally recognized themes, and then for about the first 10 years of the program, Oregon expanded its themes to reflect the priorities and how we were organizing and working on data at that time. And so we've had 16 framework themes for quite a while. I don't really see these changing really all that much. We've talked about some tweaks to them, and we've made some like name changes, small name changes recently, but that's about the extent of it. So we use these themes to help us manage the framework data sets. And there's about 150 identified framework data sets at this point. And those data sets are considered, well, I'll go to my next slide. They are considered to be the most critical and authoritative data sets that are needed for government operations. So as you and I know, there's a lot of GIS data that's out there that's created by your organizations. We have more data than we could possibly try to keep up with, right? So in an effort to prioritize data sets for funding and development and maintenance, this definition for geospatial framework data came into being, and it is meant to kind of sequester the cream of the crop data sets. It doesn't mean that there's not other important data sets. It's just a way to try to prioritize, because if we tried to do everything, we would never move the needle on the dial. We already feel challenged by that. So the primary pieces are that the data sets are considered authoritative, which there's a whole definition about what it means to be authoritative, but it's essentially a subject matter expert has created it. So, for example, the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries is the agency that creates our geoscience and hazard data sets for the state. Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, they're going to create wildlife habitat data sets for the state, right? It's not going to be ODOT creating habitat data sets that are considered authoritative. So it's recognizing that there's subject matter expertise in the state. There's also some legislative mandates on who should create or who's being mandated to create specific data sets that exist in today's landscape. But outside of that, we also are looking at data sets that serve a broad range of users and has multiple use cases. So if it's a data set that just helps your particular agency for your operations, it's probably not going to rise to the level of being a geospatial framework data, just because we're looking for data sets that are needed by multiple agencies, multiple people. So road center lines is a perfect example. It's needed by so many people. ODOT is seen as the authoritative source for the statewide layer. And I know there's local data out there, so that one's its own conversation. But hopefully you can see where I'm going with this of trying to create that subset so that we can focus our efforts. And at the same time, there is a sharing mandate that comes along with being tagged as a geospatial framework data, of rising to this level of being critical for government operations. So with that kind of lays the kind of foundation of everything I'm going to talk about from here forward. So what are we doing, and what's our vision, and what are we doing? So you all probably can really embrace the idea that successful government decisions rely on, or they depend on, reliable, accurate, and timely information. So we can have decisions that are based on best available data, but that data, even though it's the best available, could still be poor, or it could have holes in it, have great uncertainty. There's a variety of things. And so we're challenged with that. So OGIC's vision is for authoritative and reliable geospatial data to be available for government services across the entire state of Oregon. So not only can government services be provided to all of its citizens and residents of Oregon across the state, but that there's also authoritative data that is covering the extent of Oregon. We don't have big gaps. It's not just Western Oregon that has really rich data. That Eastern Oregon also has the data that it needs to do its government provision of services. So OGIC really relies on the framework program to provide the data governance needed to support the creation and maintenance of these authoritative data sets. OGIC is charged with creating a 4-year strategic plan. And that strategic plan, we're currently in the 4-year period of 2023 to 2026. Our current strategic plan is available. But it's really focused on the framework program to advance the vision of OGIC. Not too long after we did the latest update of the strategic plan, OGIC did a customer engagement survey and got a lot of feedback from the GIS community. And since then, OGIC as a council has decided that it really could benefit from its own work plans that were focused specifically on OGIC member activities that should be occurring in parallel to the framework program activities. essentially acknowledging that the council itself has work that it should be doing. I think there's a lot of advisory councils, governor appointed councils that meet, and they meet every quarter and they talk about stuff and then they go away and nothing changes, right? Like or very little gets done. That's probably one of the complaints about government. So this graphic is really kind of showing the relationship between OGIC making those strategic policy and standard endorsements and stuff like those kind of decisions, and then our office and has traditionally been the one in the middle with the framework program participants being really the work is getting done about working on specific data sets. Well, when we started creating work plans, we being OGIC decided to create some new committees, and you'll see now that middle tier of that triangle includes OGIC committees that are tasked with trying to get OGIC members more engaged, to get them to do more and be more active and improve data sharing and do a whole variety of things. So that's where this work plan and getting OGIC members more engaged and running parallel to the strategic plan kind of all fits together. We are just now finishing the end of our first 2-year work plan. And we are actually drafting our next work plan for our January meeting right now. So, but we see our role, and what we heard from the GIS community in the engagement survey that we did was that there are really 4 areas, 4 to 5 areas, 4 areas that OGIC can really lead. And they are providing leadership, oversight, and policy decisions for the framework program, like I've been talking about. But advocacy is one of those areas where the community really felt like there are geospatial issues and needs, and OGIC as a governor-appointed body is the body that could carry those issues and needs either to the legislature by meeting with the legislative committees, or presenting to them, advocating to the governor's office or wherever. So that advocacy role is pretty key. We also, of course, according to statute, have a number of reporting things that we have to do. We have to report to the Legislative Assembly, the governor, and the state chief information officer. It's required by statute. We're reporting on our ability to implement the strategic plan. So while most of us could easily be like, oh, it's reporting that you got to do to the legislature and it's mandated. Yes, but at the same time, it is the opportunity for us to get something in front of at least a few legislative members and help them be more aware about the work that we're doing, fact that we have data sets that are critical to government services and that we need their support, right? So coordination, OGIC is really the body that is seen as having the ability to get the right people in the room together, right? So coordinating with all levels of government to advance OGIC priorities. So those are where the areas where OGIC is focused in addition to the work that's being done by the framework program. So to talk about this biennium and what we've been working on with our 2-year work plan, those committees that I talked about, we set up 3 new committees in order to advance the work that we're doing. So the first committee I'll talk about is the data sharing committee. It's data sharing and governance. And so this biennium, we've been really trying to really implement that ORS 276A 509. We call it the data sharing mandate for short. But that is essentially the statute that requires public bodies to share geospatial framework data. And so you may ask, well, how would a public body know that they are the custodian of an official geospatial framework data set that OGIC has officially endorsed, right? Like trying to align up implementing statute. So part of that is that consultation is supposed to occur between OGIC and the public bodies. So while this statute has been around since 2019, OGIC hasn't really formally taken action to really move the needle on the dial to the data sharing. So we would like to be able to go to the legislature and say, we've identified these 150 data sets that are critical for government services, and this is the status of them. We know who the data stewards are. We're trying to support them. And if there's needs, try to bring those needs forward to the legislature when we report out. We also have a grant program for data development and maintenance of framework data sets. So OGIC tends to create its own priorities for the grant program. It doesn't mean that they won't provide grants for the development of other data sets, but they do have a set of data sets that are priorities. They are currently parcels or tax lots, addresses, and imagery and road center lines. And we have also been, mainly through my office, through GEO, been doing some of our priority projects this biennium. So we have a statewide parcels initiative that was kicked off last year. It's been through a pilot. We're trying to wrap up the pilot. But the goal of the statewide parcels initiative is to gather tax lot data from all 36 counties and publish that data as a service through GeoHub, and have that data be updated on a regular basis. Right now, we have a smattering of sharing that's happening across the state by the counties. There's nothing at the statewide level. We also, for state agencies, are only getting updated parcels once a year. That has proved problematic whenever we've had wildfires and stuff like that have happened in the summer, and we get, we're trying to take action. Ideally, we'd have the most recent data available. Our parcel data was, 9 months old when by the time wildfire summer season came around, versus between 9 months and a year old. So we're trying to improve the update frequency plus the distribution all at the same time. So that's a big project, as you can imagine. I'm happy to talk about that more, but that's what that project is. We have 5 pilot counties, and I would say it's going pretty well. We hit some stumbling blocks with the software that we were using to aggregate the data. So we're about to finally start publishing data, but it did delay it. But that's what pilot projects are for, is to figure everything out. Our other project, priority project, is imagery. We are collecting statewide imagery, ortho imagery, for 2024. In fact, our vendor has been collecting all summer. We have all the acquisition is complete, and we are currently in the QC. They're processing, and we're checking the imagery right now. So statewide imagery is a priority for OGIC. Our next committee is about communications. What we learned through the engagement was that pretty much nobody knows who OGIC is, or what our role is, or what we're supposed to be doing, or what we do. So that the engagement survey from the community was very telling for the committee, or for the council as a whole. So we've been really working on our communications. We did create a new hub site for OGIC. We've been participating at some GIS conferences, so you might have seen an OGIC booth at GIS in Action or at the Northwest GIS Conference. We're creating new materials for outreach, and those materials will also help us with our third committee, which is legislative coordination. So we have a legislative coordination committee that is, it's very active during legislative sessions. I feel like we're really still getting our feet with this committee. I think with this next long session, we'll probably do better than we have done in any of the previous sessions, but we're essentially tracking bills that have anything related to mapping or data or web apps or anything like that. OGIC will provide written testimony or public comment if we feel like OGIC should take a position. If you're a state agency, you know that state agencies typically cannot take positions on bills or anything like that. OGIC does have the approval to take positions and to provide public comment and testimony on bills. So that is a real pivotal and key piece where many folks believe and feel like, particularly state agencies, feel like they don't have a voice to advocate for GIS positions or funding for data projects or anything like that. And OGIC is really that body that can provide at least a face and some comment to bills that are in the session that help or hurt our community and what we're trying to do. And so the goal of this committee is to take the materials that are being developed and have been developed with the communications committee and then meet with legislators, let them know about either funding packages or stuff that we know about that's moving through, or if we have our own policy option package or legislative concept that's in the session, we want to advocate for that. So that's what that committee is about and what they're supposed to be doing. Like I said, I think this next session will probably be the one where we are more organized, and like we tracked bills last year and the year before, and I think we were still kind of working out some of our processes and getting approvals from EIS to submit testimony and what forms can we do that. So we're still government, so we still have to like work within all of the lines, make sure we don't cross any lines. So anyway, that's legislative coordination, kind of in a nutshell, probably much longer than I need to talk about it. So where can we collaborate? OGIC and the OMSC. I gave this some thought yesterday. I was sitting here pondering it and thinking about it. I've never met with this group before, so I was looking all over your website and reading all of your pages and what you have out there. The easy ones that I could come to, and this is the graphic from the framework program, because obviously I've talked a lot about framework data in the framework program and what OGIC is doing. So I think we do have some shared values and things where we have commonalities between our council and the OMSC. So collaboration. It was very clear to me that you all value collaboration, the coming together of subject matter experts and bringing the right people and helping them get in the room to either work on tools, make sure you're doing vetting methodologies, stuff like that. So I think collaboration is one of those key shared values. Authoritative data and data custodians, I feel like is another area where you could probably help us make sure that we are pointing to authoritative data sources. And we're still going through our list of data sets and trying to make sure that we have the correct data custodians and points of contacts. If we're distributing data or pointing to data in GeoHub, we want to make sure that we are pointing to the best available data. And if you're a subject matter expert in land use, economy, transportation, wherever it is you're working, those are all areas where you could plug into the framework program, or you could, when things go out for public comment, like data standards, the framework program gives us the processes to create data standards, vet those standards. Our stewardship plans talk about methodologies. So I think that there's collaboration there and where you can help. So I would say participate in the framework program. I provided the URL on the screen. We do have pages for all of our themes. like I said, provide input on data standards and stewardship. If it's aggregating data sets, we haven't really tackled road center lines. It's out there as a thing to work on. Right now, we have parcels and addresses. Parcels is active and addresses is pretty active right now as well too. But and then tell us how we can help you. If there's a bill, a legislative bill, or anything like that, or any of the things that I've covered, provide feedback and tell us how we can help you. And with that, that's all I have, and I'll open it up for questions. And it looks like I didn't save any time for questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, first, thank you so much, Rachel. That was very informative. I myself was not familiar with your group, so that was great. And also just thank you for also thinking about how some collaboration opportunities. Appreciate doing that. I know we're at time, but I do think it makes sense to discuss this topic a bit more and have questions. So does that mean you have a question, Alex? Are there any other questions? There's some questions in the back. So let's start with Alex, and then I'll get Tara and then Josh.
Thanks, Rachel. With the parcel priority, I was curious. I can imagine that some jurisdictions will have like slivers and holes in their parcel layer. Do you have any? I assume there's methods on the state side to check for that stuff, but do you pass any standards or QC techniques, procedures down to local agencies?
Yeah, so that's our goal. Right now, we're just trying to get the data, aggregate it, get it published. The software that I mentioned that we were struggling with is it does QC reporting. And so we're creating all the data validation rules where we can check the data, provide feedback to the counties. The counties are still the authoritative source, so we would still rely on them to make changes to their data. But I can say through the pilot project, we have learned all kinds of issues that are out there. Right-of-ways, whether or not we include right-of-ways or don't include right-of-way polygons, the gaps or sliver. I mean, there's no unique IDs. There's supposed to be a unique ID, but there's no, in reality, it's not unique. So like, there's all of those things that I think we've tackled a lot of the policy issues, at least with our pilot counties who are representing all 36 counties. But I think the technology and data fixes will take some time. But yes, that is the goal, is to improve the data over time.
And provide basically provide instructions for counties that are providing this back to you.
Yeah, so there's 9 counties that use the Department of Revenue to do data cleanup. So there'll be some of the easier counties because we can talk to the Department of Revenue and say, hey, you've missed this, or there's a gap here or sliver or something like that. The other counties, we're making requests and we're providing reports to them on either errors in attributes and or essential geometry checks, with the goal of hoping that they're able to make some of those improvements over time.
Sorry, I'm going to take liberty, ask a really quick follow-up question. I think maybe what I heard anyway from Alex's questions, maybe like standard methodologies and some things. Is that in your purview or not really for some of these kind of? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. So there is a cadastral data exchange standard that the counties. It's been published for some time, and many of the all of the counties are aware of it. And my understanding is they all strive to meet that standard when they're sending data to the state of Oregon. So we know that they have many more attributes, they have many more things, but that standard is what I know the counties are trying to, when they export their data out, the more robust counties have scripted it, right? They're scripting out changes in ETL procedures to get their data to match the standards. So the quality and how well they're meeting the standard is where those validation checks comes in. So we're actually using that standard to create our validation rules to say, hey, do your attributes, are you even following the standard? So we've got plenty of things to check, and but the standard is there, and it's supposed to help. We've only done 5 counties, so I guess we'll see.
Well, thank you. I think for the sake of time, I promised the 2 questions. So I think Tara, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I'm in the ODOT climate office. And so one of the things when we prepare for the climate change that's coming is the risks, flooding, wildfires, all those kind of things. I know we have some layers that we've developed, and I'm wondering if this is a good home for something like that. That would be more of the authoritative. Do you guys have those kind of layers, and would you welcome that kind of thing?
We would welcome it. We have 2 different groups. We have a hazards theme, and then we also have a climate theme. So depending on whichever one, if you want to email me, we could talk, and I could, pair you up with our framework coordinator and those themes, and we could talk about what data sets we have in those themes and what you have, and
Okay.
go from there.
Great, thank you.
And then Josh?
Rachel, this is Josh from Oregon DOT as well. Curious about the imagery. So my understanding is this is based, we do this for kind of agricultural purposes mostly. I don't know if that's true, maybe it's relevant, but I'm curious about like what the cost of that run is every year, and like what part of the cost is associated with the resolution. ODOT's going through some data development processes right now, and they're going to use a private firm that's going to develop their own, use their own imagery data and some machine learning processes, develop inventories of roadway elements. And we have to pay, it's like, but we have imagery for the whole state, but it maybe isn't good enough. And it's like, is there a world where we can get that flyover at the resolution necessary to deploy some of these remote sensing tools for asset inventorying? Is
I
my
would
motivation.
say, yeah. So yes to all of the above. So it is possible. That is the goal. The higher resolution, the higher the cost. Our current collection is a 30 centimeter or 1 foot resolution. We purposefully did not use the NATE program for imagery collection because they are focused on agriculture and we didn't like their accuracy specs. We wanted a more accurate product. And the cost of that was 1.65 million for the statewide collect. I would love to be able to do a 6-inch or even a 3 in urban areas with a 6-inch or a 1 foot in rural areas. So we are scoping out different scenarios for a more robust imagery program. I have that on my to-do list. I had requested several $1 million from the legislature for this next legislative session to try to expand the imagery program. It got reduced kind of right out of the gate. So we'll see if it makes it through the governor's recommended budget. We do have a lot of support for imagery. The collection that we just did this summer was completely funded by the legislature, which is good, but it's not enough money to get that 6-inch or better resolution statewide, which is really what we would prefer. And then even probably a higher resolution for urban areas.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I bet everyone in here who has to do data, network data maintenance would love to see a better solution that could be derived from imagery.
Yeah, I'd like to get there. I have big plans for an imagery program, but it takes money, it takes a little more resources and a lot more coordination. So yeah, lots of coordination. I would like to bring all levels of government to the conversation. There's federal dollars that could be brought to it. And then if I could get local governments on board to where I was collecting a product that would support local governments, and us collaborate on the specs and buy in on that program, I think, and with help from the legislature, I think we could get there. It may be a little pie in the sky, but somebody's got to dream the big dreams and have some big things we're trying to do. So.
Well, sounds good. Yeah, thank you again, Rachel. That again, very informative. I think there's a lot of ideas too generated from this. I think it's okay if other folks had questions or follow-up questions to email you directly.
Definitely.
Well, again, thanks so much. I think we'll move on to the next presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, sorry to be such a time. Cracking the whip there, but because I think we could have had a discussion, 20 more minutes, 30 more minutes on that. That was actually really great.
Tons of overlap between
Yeah. And then say even the imagery type of thing within a foot, that's quite remarkable, frankly. Yeah. Anyway, yes. So folks, remember we get a presentation by Alex Joyce and Alex Steinberger, I think at the MPC subcommittee meeting in July. I think. And folks, I think are pretty familiar in one way, shape or form for the CFEC requirements. Of course, one's related to defining the CFAs. I think the timeframe for that is by the end of the year, but you can also ask for an extension, I believe, on that. But anyway, quite insightful presentation on kind of what influences the development of something like that. So we asked them to come and present again. So appreciate you all being here. Are you all set to present?
We are, yeah. I'm actually connected to the teams and have the presentation here. I don't know if it makes sense for me to present so that we don't have to say next slide so many times. It's the best part. I hope not. We're in trouble if that's the best part. All right, so.
Are we mic'd up like down here or do we have to shout or what's the?
I think you're all good.
Good. All right.
All right, Peter.
Can people online hear?
Hello.
Alex and Alex?
Can you hear us? All right.
Yes.
Great. Back there. Well, yeah, thanks for having us again. And I'm Alex Joyce. This is Alex Steinberger. I'm a little older, and so he has to go by a nickname, Steiny, but that's a professional nickname. And so I'll be Alex for today, and he can be Steiny. Just a little bit about us. We're a team of about 20 professionals, planning professionals, economists, data scientists, engagement specialists. There's 5 partners in the firm. You get two of them today. Our service areas encompass quite a few aspects of what's required to analyze the analysis components and the implementation components of CFEC, and a number of other state required processes. But I head up the pre-development services component of the business, so I work on mission-driven real estate projects, public-private partnerships, help to bring my development expertise into all the policy work that we do to make sure that there's a calibration component. Any policy that we're trying to, help a community get up and running, we want to make sure that it's going to get taken up by the market, it's going to get realized. So bringing that expertise into the housing policy and the policy analysis and modeling. Alex Steinberger oversees all of our data analysis and scenario planning and modeling. So we work together closely on projects that call for, a market reality based set of, scenario planning and modeling. And then that also includes other types of analysis like anti-displacement strategies and sort of issue specific data analysis. So we're going to talk a little bit today about, what are climate friendly areas, and we're not going to give you the PhD level on climate friendly areas, just enough so that you understand the real meat of today's presentation, which is really about how can we as a profession get smarter and more accurate when it comes to representing market realities in the scenarios that we explore. And we'll talk about the factors that influence redevelopment specifically, and how Steiny in particular is baking those reality checks into the work that we're doing in some communities around Oregon. And then I'm going to pick it back up and talk a little bit about what the public sector has a role to play here. It's not just all what can the market do. That's a two-sided coin. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then have a few tips for how to implement mixed-use districts, and in particular, how to think about ground floor commercial requirements. It's an outgrowth of CFEC, but also other planning efforts is that we're having to navigate how do we actually set up new mixed-use districts for success and not do things that have unintended consequences. So CFEC, there's multiple components to CFEC, some of which communities have done or are in the process of doing. Broadly speaking, there's some parking, essentially eliminating parking requirements. There's CFAs, so designating climate-friendly areas. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then there's this whole component of addressing land use related issues for the entire UGB of the major metro areas. We'll talk about that. That's actually got some breaking news on that front to share with this special group. Get there in a second. So just as a reminder, CFAs, climate friendly areas, the requirement is that you gotta have one, it's gotta be at least 25 acres. And taken together, they have to be able to accommodate 30% of your 20-year housing need, right? So this is pretty serious stuff, right? We're designated areas where a decent chunk of our future housing need needs to go. Not only does that include zoning policy allowances, but it's all of the other public commitments in terms of filling the multimodal gaps, creating a true place in these areas. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So that includes the land use, high density, and vision is high density mixed use, but housing focused. We're going to focus today on a couple aspects of that. But then there's also this commitment that cities have to make them truly walkable. Just because you add density doesn't mean a place is walkable. So what are the other components of place that can help you achieve the intended outcomes of CFAs? But that's not all. So just today, fresh off the presses, I literally got a message about it earlier today. Our team released the Walkable Design Standards, which is a guidebook that it's out for public review as of like literally an hour ago for communities who are required to implement the CFAC rules that go beyond CFAs to address land use related issues for the entire UGB. They're housed in OAR 0330. So that's sort of our shorthand for what the Walkable Design Standards cover all the requirements in 0330. It's things like building orientation, frontages, compactness, right? What are all the regulations around compactness from a land use perspective? Access, connectivity, all the horizontal linkages that have to be made to make these places truly connected and walkable and reside in the zoning code. There's also a couple different ways you can approach CFAs. There's primary and secondary. So you have to have a primary, but for communities who want to take a little bit more of a broader view of how they are preparing multiple centers for future growth, you can also implement secondary CFAs. So primary CFAs have a higher height allowance requirement that has to go along with them. And if you want to have sort of a mid-tier, you can assemble your kit of parts using primary and secondary CFAs. So I'm going to hand it over to Steiny to talk a little bit about going beyond just sort of setting the regulatory framework, but really understanding how the market interacts in these places.
Thank you, Alex, number one. So Alex gets to introduce the state's vision for climate-friendly areas and CFAC, and then he's going to come back in and he's going to talk about what the public sector can do to influence the market and achieve the state's vision. I have the fun job of throwing cold water all over the state's vision sometimes. And so what I want to talk about, though, is an important topic, and it is how to look at what the realities on the ground are in some of these places to try to inject some reality into the assumptions that are being made. Because a lot of communities in this state and in any state where you have these big statewide preemptions happening are going to feel like in some places that they don't want to do more than the minimum that's required of them. And the way that the state has set up the requirements for the climate friendly and equitable communities rules, it means that it is actually quite easy to do something that doesn't achieve the goal of 30% of your housing need within climate friendly areas and doesn't achieve the walkable standards that Alex was talking about. And so by giving a little bit more market reality to that discussion, we make sure that communities at least have the information to not undershoot what they should be doing, to undershoot the state's vision. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the way we like to have these discussions is we like to think about them in terms of 3 buckets. Infrastructure availability. So is there actually hard infrastructure in the ground to support the amount of density that is related to the state's vision? Then landowner willingness. If you look at a climate-friendly area that's proposed and the landowners have no interest in doing anything dense or anything at all, that's obviously going to have some bearing on the outcome. And then the broader market economics.
if the rents aren't there or the broader macroeconomic factors don't support high density development right now, that should be known and should be taken into account when they're choosing where to designate climate friendly areas and how far to go with the latitude they have with these. So I'll walk through examples of each of these. We have finished one market study for the city of Springfield of their proposed CFAs. We're currently working on another one for the city of Medford. There's no requirement to do this kind of analysis. I should be clear, right? You don't have to look at infrastructure availability. You don't have to look at landowner willingness or the market. But some communities are choosing to do so. And DLCD is doing a good job of providing technical assistance to make that easier for some communities to do. So this is an example from Springfield. A lot of this is coming from Springfield, which notably is a city that is one of a handful of cities that is suing the state right now over these rules. But they also got some technical assistance from the state to examine the market economics, and that actually appeals to them. So we think through this process, we actually can achieve something more progressive. So infrastructure availability. We brought together the utility providers, the public works folks from the city, and we looked at 4 climate-friendly areas that they had proposed. And we asked them, what would need to change? What would the bottlenecks be if there were 10,000 new units in these areas? And after their eyes shrunk down to normal size, they actually got to talking and sort of identified some really important bottlenecks. So these are things like the fact that in some parts of the city, you need a pump to pump water up to floors above 3 stories, which increases the cost of higher story buildings. Or that there are new electric substations that are going to be needed in some of the areas of the city that are planned for growth. So these sorts of things are important to understand and ultimately may make the difference between one of these climate-friendly areas actually delivering on the lofty ideals that the state sets. Landowner willingness, obviously, is another big piece of this. There were 2 climate-friendly area proposals that the city was looking at. One of them is in an area called Gateway Riverbend, which is essentially a hospital campus on the north side of Springfield. There's a good amount of vacant land in that hospital campus, but all of the land is owned by a single landowner, and that is Peace Health, who operates their hospital campus there. And then the second one is called Glenwood Riverfront, which has been looked at for decades as sort of the next high density part of that region because it's closer to Eugene, across the river from Springfield, but still within the Springfield EGP. So in Gateway River Bend, we talked to the hospital and learned a lot of things about their plans that probably make this area a pretty bad choice for a climate friendly area, even though if you go by the rules, it does all the things it needs to do and delivers a bunch of housing capacity. But in reality, the hospital just closed in Eugene. This is going to be their only location in the region, and they need that land to expand their hospital uses. So not a great choice. In the second one, there is actually a lot of similarities with the development proposed in Glenwood Riverfront to what a CFA would look like. But there are also some key differences, and the area under study currently by a development team is much smaller than the overall area. So there's a lot of uncertainty there around how much development is actually likely given what landowners want to do. And then there's market economics. There are things that are in the broader macroeconomy that are holding back certain types of development in certain locations. One of the key things about climate-friendly areas, the primary ones, is that cities have to allow at least 85 feet in height and unlimited density. And that is the basis for the state's calculation of housing capacity. Basically, mow everything down in the climate-friendly area and build it back at 85 feet. Not particularly realistic, and certainly not realistic in markets where really the most viable form of construction is wood frame construction that can't go above 5 stories. That's where Springfield is. Higher than that is really only in consideration in places like Portland, Bend, and Eugene. Right now, construction costs are just really high. Rents are fairly stagnant across the state. Interest rates are also very high. So building big, expensive projects that require a lot of borrowing is really difficult. And each time you go up from wood frame to wood frame over podium to steel and concrete, you get big jumps in construction cost that require higher rents to be able to pencil out. And Springfield just doesn't have those right now. Does that mean that climate-friendly areas won't work? Maybe not now, but maybe they will in 10 years in the next real estate cycle. But it's something they should be thinking about when choosing where and how many to designate. I alluded to this a little bit just a minute ago, but the state's calculation's pretty simplistic. And I don't want to throw any shade on the state about this. They were, I think, solving for a method that was easy to explain, that jurisdictions across the state could calculate without outside help. It makes a lot of sense, but it's pretty flawed when you think about it from a market-based perspective. Because as we can all, as all of us as modelers probably understand, that scenario I painted where you mow everything down and build it back at 85 feet, it's never going to happen in a million years. So what we do as part of our market analyses for these projects is we do a market constraint calculation where we only assume development's going to happen in areas where the rents are high enough and the land costs are low enough. And we use an approach called residual land value. I promise I won't get any wonkier than this about residual land value, but suffice it to say that a developer, you can think about a developer's pro forma as having hard costs, soft costs, some fixed assumption about how much profit they want to get, and a fixed sales price or fixed project value. And so what's left is the land cost. And so you can sort of solve for the maximum that they'd be willing to pay for land given all those other factors. And so we do that for different building types. And in Springfield, we did this looking at their existing zoning. So in these areas, what would existing zoning get you? So we can compare that to what climate-friendly area rules would get you. And so I'm going to show you a series of graphics. They're pretty information dense, so I'll give you this as an orientation. What you're seeing here, the different colored bars represent different building types in different zones. And the height of the bar above the zero line tells you the maximum price that a developer would be willing to pay for land in that location. If a bar is below the zero line, that means that the project wouldn't work even if land was free. If it's above the zero line, they could pay some amount of money per foot to make that project work. And then what you see in the dotted black line, that is the sort of lowest value of land that exists in that given area. So really to work, a building type has to be above the zero line and actually above that dotted black line in that location. So what we see in this example is that really only a few building types work, and it's really on the margin, and they don't work everywhere. Garden apartments do pretty well in a market like Springfield. They're really on the margin downtown. They work pretty well potentially in Glenwood Riverfront. There's another climate-friendly area we haven't talked about called Mohawk. Weirdly, I think because the zoning today is so permissive there, the land is very expensive. And so nothing really works there. And then in Riverbend, the market's just pretty weak. And so there isn't a lot of potential there either. Then we flip on the climate-friendly area rules. All of a sudden, you can build 85 feet. You can do everything with no parking. You might have some mixed use. And what we see is that the really tall buildings, the 5-story mixed use buildings, 7-story mixed use buildings, they don't work. They're way underwater, super far below that zero line. But there are some other types that do work. And I don't talk about those in this presentation, but just to tell you here, they were things like low parking, missing middle housing at higher densities than are currently allowed in these zones. So like 6 plexes, 8 plexes on pretty small lots. Very low parking 4-story apartment buildings. Those work really well. These are all things that aren't possible today, but if the rules changed, we think there would be some potential for them to happen in these areas. And so what all this got us is a comparison of what existing code gets them under current market conditions, what the state's methodology says they would get under the state's calculation methodology, and then what we think they would yield given a primary or secondary climate-friendly area designation, given current market conditions. And what we see is a pretty stark difference. One of the differences I want to point your attention to here is in the first row. Springfield's 20-year housing need is about 27,000 units. And so 30% of that is 9,923 units. So given the state's calculation, downtown alone could satisfy the rules, right? So a jurisdiction seeking to do the minimum might say, downtown's our CFA, done, right? But what we show is that downtown probably actually has much less capacity than what the state's calculation would say. And our approach is pretty rosy on its own. So what that should lead you to believe is that downtown, if that's what you want to do, is not going to do what the state wants you to do. It's not going to fulfill the state's vision. And so if you really care about providing more opportunities for housing production and meeting the state's goals, you should designate more than one CFA. And you should maybe designate 3 to meet those goals. And so in summation of that work, in Oregon, we found that this kind of technical assistance, while not statutorily required, it's really helpful. It helps dispel fears about rapid growth. You don't have to be afraid of 7-story buildings. They're not coming. It's okay, at least not for many, many decades. It's also led to broader designation of climate-friendly areas. Springfield is considering 3 and potentially 4. And this is a city whose council is still suing the state over these rules. So it's opened up the conversation. And we think in the future, for folks like you, it'll help with transportation and infrastructure planning and the modeling that goes along with that, because you want realistic assumptions for where growth is going to happen. So with that, I will pass it over to Alex, who's going to give us back the rosy point of view.
We'll see. I mean, so what Steiny just said is scenario modeling is a moment in time analysis, right? It says what's feasible today under the current conditions. What we all know that you can change those conditions in important ways. And so, part of us striving to be a little hopeful here is that, we shouldn't just throw up our hands and say, because things don't work today from a market perspective, they will never work. And I think there is that tendency sometimes to just say, mixed use isn't going to ever work in my community. And the truth of the matter is that there's a variety of ways the public sector can influence market demand. Market demand is what drives the ability to do different building types. There's 3 main buckets here. We'll talk a little bit about them. I'm gonna get rid of this. There's the regulations which we just talked about. So what can you do? What's allowed? There are placemaking investments. So what is the quality of the space between the buildings? And is it desirable? Is it safe? Is it family friendly? Is it pleasant for bikes and pets? And then there's incentives, right? So how can the jurisdiction play a meaningful role in catalyzing, proving early market pioneers? There are developers who are willing to take a gamble in certain communities with a little bit of, public support to mitigate risk. Once you get a few of those going and you wrap them in, multimodal investments, then those places can kind of stand on their own 2 feet and take on a life of their own in terms of a market. But just the code changes alone is not going to get us to where we need to be from a CFA perspective. And I want to make this point as clear as I can with 2 examples. So I live in Bend. I'm up here for we're having an open house tonight for our office, and but these are two parts of Bend that have received a tremendous amount of planning attention, but they are having very different outcomes, even though on its face you might not expect it. So there's one that's kind of near the Leshwab Amphitheater. It's big office district. That's the one in the lower left. Then there's the core area. They've got the same zoning, right? So what you can do is the same. One has incentives and one does not. One has multiple incentive programs and one does not. They have very different street conditions, right? So the spaces between the building areas and the lots are very, very different. And as a result of some of those things, even though you can technically do the same thing, the outcomes are incredibly different. So in the central west side area, there's, like I said, same zoning. It's a pretty CFA compliant zone district currently. It's got more modern multimodal streets. So it has a connected bike ped infrastructure, connected streets. There's no development incentives in this area, none, right? So there's not an extra sort of juicing the market happening here yet. The market is responding to the conditions that surround it in terms of the built environment. Whereas for the core area, that's what this area is called, It's an aging kind of employment area, industrial area, has the same zoning. It actually has more intensity allowed than the other area we just talked about. But the public infrastructure is very degraded. It's unimproved. There's gaps in the sidewalk, or they're just non-existent in big stretches. There's multiple development incentives, large scale redevelopment incentives that measure in the many hundreds of thousands of dollars per project. But there's no plans. Like, there are people kicking tires on sites, but there's no real plans for major redevelopment in this area. And so the role of the public sector doesn't just end when we sort of turn, flip the switch and change the zoning. It's a whole nother set of investments and policy choices that we can make that will actually help to move the market. So I just don't want to lose sight of that, because in modeling, there can be a tendency to sort of change a parameter like zoning and then assume that the market reacts, when one of the things that Steiny was talking about is that that's not always the case, and this is how it's played out in reality for Bend. Okay, last little bit. So ground floor retail. For a lot of these climate friendly areas, there will be, and we've seen this, there will be a tendency, for understandable reasons, for communities to say, okay, all the ground floor area in this entire district's got to be retail, right? What does a mixed use building look like? Well, obviously it's got retail on the ground floor and something above. It's really easy to mess these kind of policy choices up and have a lot of unintended consequences if we're not careful. And ground floor retail is one of those nuanced policy choices and considerations. So just a reminder of the anatomy of a main street, right? So we've got ground floor uses, you've got frontage and activity zones. So what can happen in the front of the building, not just on the sidewalk, but in the private zone, also in front of the building. And then you've got the public realm, walkable, safe streets. So here's what we want, or here's how the CFAs are envisioned. People kind of usually respond positively to images like this, but like oftentimes we get sort of a ghost version of that image that we just were on, right? It's like the pieces are mostly there, but the people are not there, and the tenants are not there, and these places are, the ground floor components of these projects are sort of a major drag on the pro formas of these projects. And as a result, they sort of get value engineered down to their basic components and aren't even as good as they might otherwise be. So it's helpful to understand a little bit about the retail market, right? Like, ever since COVID, and even for a period before that, really, the retail market was dramatically shifting. I mean, all of us right now are empowered with our phones to buy anything we want and have it here at our house tomorrow. And so the sort of traditional commerce component of retail is waning, and we are incredibly overbuilt in terms of the amount of traditional commercial space as a nation and also as a region. There's a few bright spots. Food and beverage, right? People want to see people. People want to be around people, and people need to eat and they need to drink. And they also need to do other things, and will want to do other things, experiential things. So there's a social component to retail that's emerging, right? But this is a sliver of the historic need in terms of commercial space. So thinking very strategically about where these requirements land on the ground and how they can help to cluster a much smaller number of ground floor activities and retail requirements is important. You can see this borne out in the data. Food and beverage is still today is a little older, but like it still performs better than conventional retail, and that's not just a regional thing, but a national trend. So let's talk briefly about a little bit about streets, right? So the pie of what commercial we can expect in our mixed use districts is shrinking, but also we as folks who are taxpayers can further influence and kneecap the ability of retail to be successful if we don't design streets that actually are comfortable for people to exist on. And so our primary roads, where we have traditionally upzoned, are just not friendly places. They're loud, they're fast moving, they're stinky. They're just not pleasant places. And so, until we sort of tackle and reimagine people-oriented streets, even that dwindling amount of retail will be hard to capture within our CFA areas and make them truly mixed use and truly walkable. So, a lot of times in the zoning standards, and I won't get too deep into zoning standards, there are frontage standards that front load the massing of a building right up to the back of the sidewalk. And sometimes that works, but not in all cases does it work. Sometimes that leaves you with a very narrow and inadequate pedestrian realm, particularly on streets that haven't been reimagined, and had their multimodal components expanded. And it can lead to places that are not as hospitable as was the intent. And so part of the walkable design standards was taking some new approaches to how we think about building frontages, allowing a little bit more breathing room in the front of buildings, not for parking, not for the uses that are not going to contribute to activity, but in fact for activity. So for outdoor, outdoor spaces, for gathering, allowing some of the private realm to function as an extension of the public realm, which is, runs a little bit counter to some of the ideas that we've been taught in, from neo-traditional, Congress and New Urbanism, push everything right up to the street. Some of our most beloved places in this region and all over the state are funky. They have, a space in the front. They were an old gas station or whatever. And so, we should look to our beloved places and try and memorialize those into how we do business. And so one of the communities that we helped to do this was the city of Fairview as part of a multi-jurisdictional zoning code. And they were very clear about what they wanted. They wanted activity on the street, and they wanted that activity to be supported by new buildings, but they were pretty open to the idea that that activity could actually be in the form of food carts, right? Like ways that the market could actually deliver the activity, lower cost, Class A, newly constructed steel and concrete retail is really expensive, and it has to command really high priced rents in order to sustain it. In some ways you can think about it, it's the most expensive slice of a building, right? Everything else above it is maybe wood frame. The ground floor is the most expensive part, and it's got the weakest market dynamics. So how do you achieve what you want, but in a way that the market can respond? And so their Main Street code that we helped them craft allows for achieving those outcomes through more tactical means. They're required, right? And it also is very intentional about the locations where those things are required. So prior to them doing the zoning work, ground floor retail was required across the entire corridor, right? It was just sort of pretty conventional approach. Everywhere that touches the primary street, Halsey, has to have a ground floor component. Well, you're not going to get that outcome. So, where are the places where you really want to reinforce that urban form? And let's be clear there, and then be a little bit more flexible and accommodating in the in-between areas. So these Main Street district areas were established. So refining our thinking about where these things need to be required, and then being more open to different ways of achieving the desired outcome, which is activity, is important. So that's it for us. These are some lessons from the field that we've been able to experience and help communities navigate through for the last couple of years, and I'm sure we'll have more as the CFEC touches the ground in more places as well.
Great. Thank you, Alex. I'm not sure if that's the same before to call you Steiny, so I'll probably just call you Alex if that's okay. But yeah, I know close to being a little bit over, but again, I do want to have time for any questions or comments as well. So does anyone have any questions?
I've already had plenty, so other people go too.
Just interested in like the general sense of where consumer preferences are headed, right? And how you influence, those preferences as a way then influencing what developers, think they can pencil out with, right? And so how long of a process is that, right?
How long of a process is it to understand?
So, you mentioned the example of like, garden apartments or garden units, pencil out better than some of these other apartments. But that's just cost, right? Purely cost. There's the other dimension of, do folks actually prefer to live in these places, right? And then will developers actually build these places, right? So how does that dimension sort of work itself out, right, with some of your analysis? Purely the consumer preference side.
Yeah, we just wrapped up a kind of a policy piece for the Sacramento Area Council of Governments because they were interested in understanding why they're lagging behind all their peer regions building multifamily. And I think that the pandemic definitely influenced consumer preferences. Having a little bit more space is something that is, there's definitely a premium on that now. And proximity to where you work is maybe a little less important for some sectors, right? You all think about this in your transportation modeling work, I'm sure. But I think that those are not particularly durable trends. I think ultimately amenities of the type that Alex was talking about are the thing that will be durable over time and in keeping demand high in these locations. That, and if we can't figure out our housing production problems, right? Cost is the other thing. So the other side of the consumer preference thing is preferences that are induced by cost sensitivity, right? And we're starting to see even developers, big developers of single family homes like Lennar and KB Home building very, very small detached single family homes and then moving into attached product. And so I think if prices stay high, that's going to do more than anything to influence people's interest in more compact units. And if that's the case, the trade-off that they're making is, aside from cost, is I want to be in a place that's amenitized. I want to be in a place where there's something nearby that I can walk to. And then the last thing I'll say is that I think especially in a place like Portland or Eugene or Bend, the potential for a car light lifestyle where you don't actually need to own a car is close, but just out of reach. A few years ago, we had lots of car sharing. The opportunity for living a completely car-free lifestyle that still involved cars was there. And there was no subsidy for that. And now it's gone. Those companies have stopped doing that in most cities. And so I think until we can get closer to that, there still will be some fight over, do we provide parking? Or is there enough on-street parking to satisfy the demand of a new no parking building, right? So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that helps. I've lived in Portland for going on 8 years now and had the chance to visit Orenco Station 2 weeks ago for the first time and blew my mind. And I was thinking, well, how does Orenco Station happen in this place? Doesn't happen in some of the other stations, like I get out of Monica and there's nothing really there. And so it's pretty, I'm sure that the timing was right, sort of right place, right time, right landowner, I'm guessing.
Landowner, yeah.
So,
White Elephant for about 3 years now.
but it's an amazing place now.
Now.
And it just blew my mind.
Yeah. The other thing, this is a little further afield, but I think an important thing to pick up on with the consumer preference. We always try to step back and ask, like, is everything a consumer might want actually on the shelf? And if you travel really anywhere else in the world, ownership, multifamily product is on the shelf, and it is not on the shelf in any measurable amount in America, particularly in the West Coast. And that has there's a lot of legal reasons for that, liability reasons for that, but you're leaving out a segment of the market that has actually the most ability to have agency in terms of housing choice, right? More middle class and upper income.
So folks,
there's nothing on the shelf for them. Yeah. And whereas, in Europe, that product's on the shelf and the market potential is just inherently broader.
I'll say probably one question. Yeah. Sorry.
The couple things I didn't hear from you, all communities in Oregon have this Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. So I don't know how that factors in here. Also, the governor is pushing a lot of housing. Actually, national presidential candidates are pushing housing. How do we capitalize on this? And maybe it's, those public things we can do to grease the skids. But what else could, and you talk about people-oriented streets. What does that mean? So what about this housing stuff going on? How do we get advantages? And then what are the people-oriented streets and where are the standards for those? Do they exist?
Sure. So on the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, the ONA, that's going to eventually trickle into that 20-year housing need number that needs to be satisfied. And that 30%, as it relates to the climate-friendly areas, 30% of the housing needs to go there. So that's the
Okay. So there are conversations happening to move that forward. I mean, I mean, they exist out there, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just like, are they being brought together?
You mean the,
Because you would have to
Changing
do these incentives in the locations to make that market happen in a downtown CFA as opposed to the edges, which are gonna be cheaper to.
The conversation around how do you make these CFAs do what they are intended to do, I think is partly there, right? There's some expectations about, what you need to do to improve the public realm and the transportation infrastructure in these areas. But there's not really any expectations that the public's obligation goes beyond that to like incentivize, right? Like it's a logical next step, but it's not really part of the requirements. And so, communities who really want to understand what it takes, like Ben and many other communities, will say, okay, I've got the regulatory regime sort of figured out, or it was imposed on me by the state, but that's kind of not a barrier anymore. Okay, I've identified the multimodal gaps that I got to fill, and those are now in my CIP, my capital improvement plan. Or I've got to, but then the next step is like, how can I supercharge this? A tax increment financing district will allow me to get a lot more shovels in the ground, both to improve the infrastructure, but also to contribute to those catalytic early stage market making projects that help to accelerate. There's an accelerant component here that looks a little bit more like those incentives or special purpose districts like TIF. And the state hasn't been, not showing up in this. They're like the infrastructure, the infrastructure fund for housing, as a first step. So the state recognizes that there are real costs here and that local communities are hamstrung when it comes to fiscal ability with our property taxes system the way it is. And so the state's got a role, but also local jurisdictions are making the tough choices to tax themselves more or recycle taxes locally with TIF, et cetera. But that's a sophisticated step that takes capacity at the staff.
I think just a layer deeper into the incentives piece, there's the incentives that help a project fill its last 30% of need to become a penciling project, right? But a project doesn't get there if the place where it is being considered has deficient infrastructure. One developer cannot shoulder the burden of a new sewer line or new water line. So about your question about, if something happens at the federal level to increase housing production, I hope it takes the form of more than just the incentivizing of like gap financing for housing. It needs to be backbone infrastructure to fix those problems at a district scale so that developers can get a project that far to accept the gap financing. And a TIF can do that to some extent, but I think there's so many areas that are being considered as climate friendly areas that are in our aging commercial corridors that are so deficient that there's not enough money to fund that all with TIF. There needs to be some federal or state source.
Great. Well, I appreciate you guys breaking down all those pieces so we can start to really tackle it in a more intelligent way.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then on the pedestrian oriented streets, any recommendations there?
Oh, I mean, that's making investments in reimagining what the primary streets within the CFAs, what their role is, who they need to serve, and how they should be designed to be pleasant, safe places. I mean, my measuring stick is, can my 7-year-old son kind of run wild in these places and be safe? But everyone's got their own measuring stick. But like ultimately, they've got to be places that support activity and people and safety.
Right. I mean, you showed that one by the gas station. It had the bike lanes on it. So technically it was safe and had crossings, but would you want to be there?
Oh, God. I mean, I
So
wouldn't.
that's the twist. Yeah. The
Yeah,
orienting.
yeah, exactly. Reallocating some of that space for safe, people on feet or.
And maybe go from the safety to comfort. And then
Yeah, I think there is an element here of comfort. We're trying to create more downtowns across our state. That's like the most, I think, a simple but helpful way to think about what the CFA work is. It's creating more truly accessible, friendly, safe downtowns in multiple parts of our community. And I think if you think about it as a downtown, it's like, oh, these places better be special. And I think that helps.
Yeah, and it seems like just having the intention with a boundary that we're all investing in this thing. And so we're hoping the pieces will all fall together and we need to double check that. But I mean, that's a start. Because before that, it was more like, well, let's let the
Way out ahead
market.
on this stuff. It's impressive. We work all over the country and, proud to be part of this experiment as well. Yeah.
Sorry to cut everyone off. Thank you again for the encore presentation. We have one last remaining agenda item. Talk about the OMUG, Oregon Modeling Users Group events, some other national events. So I think Garth was going to do that, and I see Garth online, so feel free, Garth.
Go to the calculator.
Oh, all right. Thanks, Chris. And thanks, Carol, for running the slides. Good to see many familiar faces in the room. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but hope to catch you all soon at an event. So I'm one of the three coordinating committee members on the OMUG, along with Kyle Hogger and Liming Wang. Seen many of you at OMUG events in the past. So we just have a couple slides to show what we've been up to and what's coming up. So over the last 6 months, we've had three events. Back in April, we had a session on transportation safety. Then in early August, we had a mix of topics, and then just last week we had an event focused on urban sim and some of the work that's being done there for land use modeling. And that tool set. And I'd say, and with all those, you could see back on the table with all those, we've been having pretty good turnout, usually 40 attendees plus, the exception of the one that fell earlier in the summer. So that's always good to see. All right, so next slide, please, Carol. And all the materials are on the website, of course, as well. So we've got some good items coming up. There'll be one more event in late fall on performance measures, standards, and mobility policies. And then early in 2025, of course, is our annual post-TRB brown bag event where we get together and discuss the latest happenings and topics from TRB. And then in the future, there will also be a vision eval session as well, but that's yet to be scheduled. Go ahead to the next one, please, Carol. All right. So as far as some training and conference opportunities, there's a few here we wanted to flag again. Over the next year, there's of course TRB, the annual meeting, as well as some of the other specialized conferences. Of course, these are all around the country. One of them is in the Northwest. The TRB conference on data and AI for transportation advancement is going to be in Seattle in May. One of the other ones I wanted to point out too is next September in Minneapolis, there's the Zephyr Modeling and Mobility Conference, which for many of you that recall the prior TRB conferences on the Planning Applications Conference, it was last in Portland in 2019. That conference has similar topical areas and is I think making an attempt to pick up some of the types of presentations and knowledge sharing that's been continued in the past from some of those TRB committee conferences. So I'm hoping to go, and I'm hoping many of you can too. Any other key upcoming conferences? If so, please let us know in the chat. We'll try to get those on the list as we're continuing to share those with the OMUG group. And as always, if you have suggestions for upcoming conferences or upcoming topics to cover, many times we talk about some of these things in advance and then figure out when the timing is right. But we recognize also that sometimes opportunities for topics come up that are very timely that we can pull together quickly. So let us know if you have either a shorter term or longer term topical idea. We'd love to hear from you. All right. With that, hope to see you all soon. Thanks, Carol.
Yeah, thanks, Garth. I'll just say again, there was I think Cindy had a suggestion to let us aware of another conference.
Yeah, I wanted to let everybody know that I think you've all heard of Railvolution, and it's now called Impact. That conference is happening next week in Philadelphia, but in October of 2025, it's going to be in Portland. And so I wanted to get that on everyone's radar. It's going to be October 25th through the 29th, the Hilton downtown. And it's not too early to send, you can feel free to send it to me if you want. But we're looking for just session topic ideas, doing some brainstorming on that. Mobile workshops, if any of you have contacts or, suggestions for that. Love to hear those ideas. We're very early in the the planning stages, so I don't have a whole lot of other information, but
Those sponsoring agencies, okay.
yeah, and I didn't attend last year. I heard someone else did that said that there really wasn't a lot of like data modeling sessions, and so we want to make sure that we have that presence at the next one.
I'm not cool enough to know what is this what do they cover? What's this conference? Yeah.
It's.
Oh.
Matt, I'll let you
Can I be
talk
cool?
to Minnie.
It used to be Rail Evolution, and it's a lot of the really started by Earl Blumenauer years ago in Portland. It's grown a lot. I went to it in Miami, been to a couple other ones, but it's mostly planners about light rail. It was really light rail focused at the beginning, but it's expanded to BRT. And part of the name change was because it's not just about rail evolution. There are a lot of people from Portland, City of Portland Metro that go to this thing, but it was not super. And they used to have a session with FTA at the beginning that was great, where they talk about new starts, small starts, but that just wasn't there last time I went. So yeah, not a lot of super technicals.
Cindy, when a call for presentations, an official one goes out, could you share that with OMSC? That would be, that would be great. And certainly if there's like a need for data, like topics, I think this group could come up with some creative ones.
I think the MPC would probably handle that.
Noted.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Cindy. And thank you, Garth. I know we're at time here, but just a few more minutes to see if there's anything to share for the good of the order. This could be anything really, staffing changes, all these things. Go ahead, Tara.
There's a Vision Eval panel 101 that's next week, so I'll try to get that to Carol maybe to share out. Vision Virginia DOT, myself, and then RSG. So a little bit of under the hood and all that. So that's next week, 22nd. Also, we have the opening in TPOW position opening.
Yes.
People probably
TPAL is an open position, senior transportation analyst position. Some of the core things related to that is the CFAC modeling and analytical requirements. So this person will be helping Zachary with those. Another big component of that is the Vision Eval. Will definitely lead the implementation application of Vision Eval. And that's open now. This is actually previously an engineering position where you needed a PE license. Now it's a planner position. So that's that requirement's not there. So yeah, people are interested, let me know. I'm happy to give you a job announcement and things like that. Application is closed the 28th on that. Good call.
And I also wanted to give everyone a heads up that should be by Friday, we will have an opening for research program director. So that would be Matt and my boss. So we're adding, another visionary leader to really look forward to what our research, what our modeling, what our GIS is going to develop into. So, yeah, right.
Anything else to share? All right. Well, great meeting. Thank you all. And I'll use this one last time because I can. We'll end the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Carol, for hosting.
Well, I wonder if that's such a
Biennial, so it's every 2 years.